Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a special meeting of Council, June 22nd, to recognize we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M192, which replaces Ministerial Order number M139. This new order outlines the requirements local governments must follow when conducting public meetings. As all health orders must also be considered in conjunction with this order, staff will be bringing forward a report outlining options for how meetings of the public can be safely accommodated to the July 20th, 2020 meeting, at which time there will also be a staff report on the COVID-19 recovery plan. Until then, I am seeking a motion from Council as follows, and I'll be turning to Councillor Martman in a minute to ask her to move it. Motion that as per Ministerial Order M192, Section 3 and 4, the following rules for all Council and Committee meetings for the period June 22nd, 2020 through July 13th, 2020 be in effect until such time as guidelines and an operational plan can be considered by Council that ensures the health and safety for members of the public to attend open meetings. 1. Members of the public are required to observe meetings virtually and not attend in person. Delegation requests for unrelated council matters will not be permitted under this order and throughout the duration of the pandemic. Delegation requests related to agenda items such as a developer coming to speak to his or her DP application or a member of the public to speak to an item on the agenda will be allowable as physical distancing requirements could be maintained. Question period will be suspended throughout the duration of this order being in effect. Council attend via Zoom or in person at these regular meetings, maintaining physical distancing at all time. And members of staff that are partaking in the meeting will be spread out in the auditorium in the marked seating or outside in the lobby area. Councillor Marmon.
Motion is moved.
Thank you. A seconder? Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. And Ms. Gurry, we have a couple.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. For today, for late items, we're adding presenter Kathy Shaw, Resource Development Coordinator at the Child Development Centre, to presentation 5A, Mafio Sutton Park reopening. And agenda item 7D, we're adding Nanaimo Climate Change Resilience Strategy document that was included on your addendum published Friday. And that's it, Your Worship.
Very good. Motion for approval of the agenda is amended. Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. A number of good news items as we move into the summer in the Mayor's report. Firstly, the City of Nanaimo Department of Parks, Recreation and Culture is pleased to announce the seasonal opening of water parks located in Harewood Centennial Park, Deverell Square Park, Departure Bay Kiwanis Park, and Mansfield Park on Thursday, June 18th. And they are open daily from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. And of course, guidelines for usage to stop the spread of COVID will be posted at each location. Secondly, after consulting with provincial sporting organizations, Dr. Bonnie Henry, BC's Provincial Health Officer, and Island Health, the City of Nanaimo sports fields are now open with sports courts opening by Monday, June the 22nd. Some key points: city maintenance crews will begin work to reopen the fields and courts and started last week with the aim of having them ready for today. Artificial turf fields along with gated basketball courts at Departure Bay, Centennial Park, Beaufort Park, Lindley Point, Gyro Park will be opened first with amenities following after. Volleyball courts and basketball courts are included in this round of openings. The basketball court at Mafeo Sutton is currently closed due to construction in the area and will open shortly. Any formal use of sports fields must be approved first through a parks allocation booking by calling 250-755-7517, and you'll be asked to provide your safety plan. City of Nanaimo indoor recreation facilities, including pools, arenas, the Harewood covered multi-use court, lacrosse boxes, and city-owned cultural venues remain closed at this time. But a reopening strategy is being worked on by city staff, and I must say to the public who are listening, it has been repeated many times. It's pretty easy to shut facilities down, but it is damnably difficult in these times to comply with all the rules to open them up again. So I compliments to city staff and Parks and Rec who are working hard to achieve this, and all keeping in mind public safety and keeping it paramount. Finally, annual water quality testing in Departure Bay is taking place each year from May through September. The City of Nanaimo monitors the water quality in Departure Bay to make sure it's clean for beachgoers and wildlife. To help keep the bay water clean and the beach open, pet owners are reminded to take their dogs to other designated dog parks and off-leash areas. The City of Nanaimo's wastewater section monitors coliform levels in Departure Bay to ensure that the beach can remain open during the peak season, May 1st to September 30th each year. And each week, 26 samples are taken from Departure Bay and the surrounding contributing waterways to ensure coliform levels remain within federal health guidelines. Animal feces that wash into Departure Bay or even that enter into a contributing creek drainage ditch or storm sewer system can potentially raise coliform and E. coli levels in the water and may cause a breach closure. So please, with your pets and other creatures, take care. And finally, Nanaimo Fire Rescue applauds the Fire Smart efforts on Protection Island. Protection Island has increased its resiliency against wildfires after a week-long Fire Smart event. The Protection Island Fire Smart Board, along with residents of Protection Island, worked together to apply Fire Smart principles to homes and properties on the island community. Efforts to reduce the risk of wildfires spreading in protection included cleaning dry brush and debris from around houses and other buildings. In total, approximately 75 tons of potential wildfire fuel, such as invasive species and large wood debris, were cleared. A wood chipper and crew spent 3 days converting approximately 35 tons of the cleared debris into usable chips, which homeowners will use on their properties for various projects. This is the first one organized in protection. This inaugural event is in addition to the continuing ongoing work completed annually in Protection Island parks by parks maintenance staff. Nanaimo Fire Rescue supports Fire Smart community champions to assist them in establishing Fire Smart programs in their neighborhoods, and the City of Nanaimo has been recognized as a Fire Smart community. So, congratulations to Protection Island. We are now on to presentations. The Maffeo Sutton Park reopening. Let's play.
Thank you, Worship. I was just continuing with a lot of your announcements about openings of parks and facilities. I know we mentioned I'd do another update today during this meeting, so I wondered if there's any questions or comments council or that may have on some of those announcements that you made. But as I say, as the information comes in, and as we mentioned at last council, we'll have a more detailed report on our indoor facilities on July 13th. But we continue to open up facilities. You notice the sports fields this week, some of our sports courts. Our lacrosse boxes we hope to open up later this week, as well as another covered space. And so we'll continue on with our facilities. I know council's starting to get questions about pools and ice rinks. And so we continue to work. We have some more information coming out this week from National Life Saving Society, as well as other agents, other health authorities that help us guide our plans, and it is changing. So as that information comes in, we get more and more details on that. But if council had any questions of some of our phased openings and based on His Worship's reports.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Harding. I'm just curious, Mr. Harding, some of the sports groups that are starting to reopen, and I notice softball is among them, and when they establish their protocols, are they vetted first through their provincial association, or do they come to the city, or are both organizations involved?
Yeah, so it's been very encouraging as BC Parks and Recreation Association as well as VS Sport work really closely with the province on some opening procedures for a variety. And then those agencies, particularly VS Sport, worked with all the other sport organizations, the main office, so Baseball BC or Softball BC. And so all those agencies work to create their overall guidelines. Then each group and organization, so for example, Nanaimo District would have to take their procedures and adapt them to their locations and what they're doing. And they provide us with both their parent organization as well as how they're doing with in our facilities, and we take those and keep those and ensure that they're covered off. We'll as long as they show they have a plan and they're following those plans, that's what we're looking for. So that's everything from BC Rowing was the first. The local rowing group was the first to come out. They used their rowing association's guidelines, and they were able to get the rowing system worked out and had it be open.
That sounds very comprehensive. Thank you.
It is, and then, as I mentioned, there's many, many different groups and organizations, so we're working with all of them achieving that. So people see the ball fields actually this last weekend open for practice for baseball, tonight for softball, and hopefully see some more activity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harding. So on to the
Yes, thank you, Worship. So this is another COVID issue. Normally we'd be on this in the park and having a nice big opening with ribbon cutting and such, and so nowadays we can't do that. So this is our first virtual opening. Even though we did a soft opening of the new Phil Sutton Park Inclusive Playground last week, and I'm glad we did because it was packed all weekend long. So this is our chance to officially open up a major partnership with a number of groups and organizations. I'm going to turn over really quickly to Kathy Shaw from the Child Development Center. But what I'd like to do is go through kind of a virtual photo shoot of stakeholders and people that helped us get this project up and running and open. And again, it's a big step for us to create a completely inclusive playground. This is just phase one. This is for 5 to 12-year-olds. Phase 2 is 2 to 5-year-olds, we hope to do in the next few years. But the goal here was a completely inclusive playground that for all ages and abilities can come and enjoy and use. And we'll have some pictures coming up that hopefully show some of those creative different pieces of equipment that provided that. So thank you, Council, for letting us do that here today in your meeting. I'm going to turn over to Kathy as I got a statement from the Child Development Center, then we'll do some pictures.
Ms. Shaw, welcome.
Thank you. Clean first.
Yes.
I'll get in trouble if I don't clean it first.
So good afternoon, I'm Kathy Shaw, the Resource Development Coordinator for the Nanaimo Child Development Center. Our Executive Director, Dominic Rockwell, was unable to be here today, so he sends his regrets. But on his behalf, I would like to share with you a statement that he's provided. In 2015, Scott Bradford, the former Executive Director of the Nanaimo Child Development Center, spearheaded the concept of creating an inclusive playground for the City of Nanaimo, and began doing preliminary research. A partnership was put together which included the City of Nanaimo, Nanaimo Association for Community Living, Nanaimo Child Development Center, Rotary Clubs of Nanaimo and Lantsville, and Pacific Sport. The vision was gathering a place for children and adults to play and engage with their natural surroundings in a safe, inclusive space that was accessible and welcoming to people of all ages and abilities. In 2018, the Nanaimo Child Development Center, sorry, he's got it in abbreviations, the Nanaimo Child Development Center was successful in accessing a grant from the Children's Health Foundation of Vancouver Island of $100,000 for this project. At the Nanaimo Child Development Center, we are incredibly thankful to the City of Nanaimo and the Children's Health Foundation for investing in this exciting project. We sincerely express our appreciation and gratitude to everyone who was and is part of this initiative to create accessibility, celebrate inclusion, and build our community. The benefits of a new playground will extend to people of all ages and abilities. Inclusive spaces benefit the entire community. Adults with mobility limitations can swing and engage in active play with their children rather than watching in the sidelines, and grandparents can feel comfortable with stable ground surfaces. Participation in playgrounds lead to the development of social and emotional skills that can have a lifetime of impact. When children play, they learn to build relationships with peers, solve problems, experiment, invent, and generate ideas. Mental and physical health is also improved, and there is a proven reduction in the risk of many health conditions. The creation of this accessible play space will provide the opportunity for all children to experience these benefits. Thank you to the City of Nanaimo and all the other partners for realizing our vision and making this essential investment in our community. So thank you from Dominic Rockwell and all of us at the Child Development Center.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the Child Development Center's continued work in this community over many decades that has benefited literally thousands of people.
Your Worship, asked Kathy to stay up if there's any questions. So right now we just have a number of pictures, and rather than me speaking on each one, I think I'll let the pictures speak 1,000 words on things. But also, I know council's been involved in this, particularly our two members of council on our inclusiveness committee that had presentations of it, and also with our inclusive committee on site. So as I go through, if council wants to add anything, I'm sure that's great, or we can wait till the end. But this is our brand new and redeveloped playground, which is completely inclusive at Methvale Sutton Park. There's a group picture of all the different agencies and the site last week. This is a major zip line, which, as you can see, there's those of us who need assistance have a chair they can get into and do a zip line, plus another one on the other side for able-bodied, which they can then race each other. So a great zip line that's going to be enjoyed by all. And I think it actually was enjoyed by some council members too. As they went through. This is an interesting one. So this picture here is of the new merry-go-round there, which is also, so children in wheelchairs or other mobility issues can actually go inside that, and there's a little handle there they can actually pull it around so they actually move themselves with it, so they can feel like they're actually participating. The safety surfacing there is also that with the rubberized safety surfacing allows much more accessibility. This is Noel Brown, and one of the visions here was to commemorate the salmon running on the millstone, and also honor the SFN history here in this area. So Noel did all the artwork in this area, including some of the fence designs here. We're coming up with some of the new gateways, creating that environment. Major feature here, so many different aspects. People just have to go down and actually see it and watch the children, or get in there yourself and enjoy the feature. That's a major key feature. And again, Child Development Center, through some grants, helped substantiate with this play feature. And there's a zip line. Another totally accessible and inclusive piece of equipment. The one in behind, there's a swing bridge or swing apparatus that, again, a variety of people with mobility issues and totally able to get in there and enjoy. These are our all-star cast, our playground specialist, making sure everything's working out just fine. And there's some happy customers there.
That's a great picture.
And a variety. So we're very, very excited about, here's the feature here, and there's the wheel I was telling you about, that you can actually get yourself moving with it. This is the Child Development, this is your board, right? Yeah, this is the board, Child Development Board. And that's it. So, council, I'm not sure, we haven't done a virtual opening that I know of before, so however, I'll turn it to you, or if there's any questions.
I was going to say, if anyone wants to make a comment before I do the official opening. Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I just would really like to thank you. And as chair of the Diversity and Accessibility Committee, we went out and the people loved it. They thought it was a great step, and I really look forward to our next phase. And I really like the zip line.
No one else. So,
Your Worship, I just want to make sure we did capture everyone that was really a partner in this. So definitely the Children's Health Foundation of Vancouver Island, Nanaimo Childhood Development Center, the Nanaimo Association for Community Living, and Nanaimo Child Development Association received a $100,000 grant towards the project. Right now we're about $650,000 to make this happen. It does cost a bit to do these kind of playgrounds, or any playground really. And then just recently we received a $27,000 grant from Tire Stewardship BC, because we used recycled tires for the play surface, so that was part of that. And then just two, if I can, we don't usually do it, but two staff people, young staff people that did very much to get this done. Scott Newlands, who was a project manager, he made it happen on site, and Kirsten McDonald, our parks planner, who did a lot of the design and working with the groups to get it to a point where we're open.
well, Mr. Harding, let me say on behalf of council to you, to staff, to all the parties who participated in funding this and planning it and making it happen, it is a wonderful addition to our city. And as I like to remind everybody, it was a very long time ago that the original inhabitants of this land, the Snuneymuxw First Nation, welcomed people to Nanaimo. And I can't think of a more fitting place to display Indigenous art, but also to extend to anyone who comes to this community of any ability a bigger welcome than you could give by having a place where we can play and recreate all families, all children happily and safely. So without further ado, I hereby declare the Maffeo Sutton Park Inclusive Playground officially open.
Thank you, Worship. And of course, as a Parks, Recreation, and Culture Director or General Manager, I always have another commercial moment. So in behind here, we're currently working on the Rotary, the Rotary Peace Park. I think it's going to have a different name when we open it up, but it completely plans in with this playground. And soon we'll come with an opening of our new skateboard park at Herod Centennial, and then some other things to do with the baseball stadium. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Shaw, for coming today, please.
Thank you.
Next, the more mundane, a motion for adoption of consent items. Moved Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Before we get into the reports today, in case I forget, I just want to extend to all staff who participated in the preparation of some fairly substantial reports that are going to be reviewed today. Thanks on behalf of Council. There's obviously a great deal of work gone into this. The first item, however, is Municipal Security Issuing Resolution Fire Station Number 1. Ms. Guri.
Thank you, Worship. The purpose of this report is to seek Council's approval for borrowing $2 million, which is the second draw from the Municipal Finance Authority, MFA, for Fire Station Number 1, which was a project previously approved by Council, and the $17 million borrowed was not borrowed all at once, as the Municipal Finance Authority has a process in place to take small draws of that money in order to save interest costs. So this is asking for the second draw.
Recommendation.
Seconded Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any contrary? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is item 7B, Plan to Restore Old City Quarter Security and Pride of Place, and that's Mr. Lindsay. And Mr. Corson?
Your Worship, I just understand that the delegation who's going to be joining us has been delayed. So I wonder if we could push this one down to the end if possible.
That works for me.
Yeah, Your Worship, if we just move on to item C, and Mr. Lindsay can just stay where he
I
is.
was just going to say, Mr. Lindsay, we're now Reimagine Nanaimo Demographics and Land Inventory / Capacity Analysis Summary.
Just want to make sure we had our presenter for
Had
the
the
next
team
item
in
available
place.
before I introduced it, Your Worship. Thank you. So this report, and I'll turn it over very quickly here to Ms. Bhopal Singh to walk you through the report, but certainly what I would describe this work as foundational work that's required whenever you're about to embark on reviews of your strategic plans. So if you're going off, in our case, looking at OCP and a number of other documents, it's really important to have an understanding of where do we think the community is going to grow in the long term, and what is our land and our land needs going to be during that time frame. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Bhopal Singh to introduce the reports and walk you through them.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bhopal Singh. Welcome.
Okay, good afternoon, Council. So we were last before you on February 24th, and so this is an update on our demographics and land inventory and capacity analysis, which you have attached, and also the summary of our demographics report. So I'm going to go through this report now. So as Mr. Lindsay stated, doing this background work is foundational and fundamental to our reimagined strategic planning process. And again, the benefits of our coordinated approach is that we're working off one song sheet, so to speak, in terms of understanding where we're at in terms of our demographics, where we anticipate our growth being under both a high and a low scenario. And having that done for more than one case also helps us as we have to reevaluate given the context of COVID and where that puts us economically and also with our population projections. So in terms of these highlights, I'll try not to read exactly off the slides here, but in the big picture, the city's grown an average of 2% over the past decade, with an additional 16,000 people living in the city between 2006 and 2016, which was our last census. Now, going forward, we expect to grow at an annual rate of between 1.1% to 1.7%. Again, that's a low to high scenario there, with population ranging, again, in the low context, to 126,000 approximately, to up to 141 or 142,000. And you'll notice the projections are out to 2046. So this is in keeping with our planning cycle that we're looking at for our Reimagine process, where we're looking at planning for the next 25 plus years for our community. As anticipated for many years, we know that we have an aging population, and looking at that increasing. Okay.
No, you can. I think Councillor Markman has a question.
Yes.
I was just curious in reading this. If our average rate for 10 years was 2%, why are we saying the maximum will be 1.7? Are we not anticipating as much growth, or?
We're going over a longer time frame to 2046. I think would be the right appropriate answer. And actually, I might turn to, do I have Mr. Schulberg with us here? So I will, from time to time, be asking Mr. Schulberg for a bit of help. He's been our technical background person on this, but I think that is why we're looking at that longer, yeah, more expanded time frame.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just, okay. Now, where population has a really important, why we need to understand our population employment growth is when we're starting to look at our land use planning and how we want to tweak, shift, change the policies we have in our official community plan, Parks, Rec, Trail, Culture Master Plan, water supply strategy, and all these strategic documents, is what's the impact going to be on our ability to accommodate future growth. So here we've got the city's housing supply is estimated to grow from between approximately 40,000 units in 2016 to up to 54,000 in a low growth scenario, or 60,000 by 2046. In terms of job projections, we're looking at, again, an increase from the 2016 census of around 46,000 to a 27% increase in a low growth scenario to 58,000 jobs approximately, or in a high growth up to 63 or 64,000. And then here you've got Nanaimo's major employment sectors have been growing, particularly those reliant on heavy and light industrial space. So as we talk about the land inventory and capacity analysis, that will relate back to that work. So the largest number of jobs are provided within retail, healthcare, accommodation, food, services, construction, education. This is similar to the last few years.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Popelsing. When we're reading through these documents, and the projection is quite a long time from now, 25 years, when I look back 25 years, where we're coming from, the job market in this town has changed considerably. How much, not so much faith, but how much stock should we put in these long-range projections in terms of job markets when it's quite possible we don't even know what sort of jobs are going to be available in 25 years from now?
That's a really good question. That's one of the challenges with doing these types of studies, and why demographic studies can be updated every 5 to 10 years. Based on the information we have today and the expertise of our consultants who are looking at trends not only in BC but in similar sized municipalities across Canada, we can be confident, I think, of the next 5 to 10 years. And then as technology shifts and opportunities shift, we would, I think, look at revisiting that. And I think that's where this work is also the foundation of the economic development strategy update as well. And as you know, every 5 years, you can refresh and review. You know, you might get a major employer or an opportunity coming to our city that dramatically changes. COVID has given new opportunities for different types of businesses, or the evolution of a different style of working, whether it's perhaps more people starting to work from home, different adaptations. And so I don't know if that answers your question,
no, it's
but
fine. Okay.
the intention is that this isn't going to be the, I guess, song sheet that we work off for the next 25 years, that as we see things shift, we would review it. Much like the OCP, the official community plan we update typically every 10 years as best practice. We don't, even though the lifespan of the document is intended anywhere out from 25 to even possibly up to 100 years when you look at sustainability, you still review it every 10 years or so to make sure that the figures that you're working off are accurate. So,
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Okay, so this is letting you know that strong growth has occurred in industries related to construction, professional health services, particularly in the last 5 years. And that also since 2011, we've seen the adult working population achieve higher levels of education and participation rates in the economy. And that's been occurring since 2015. So in terms of trends and where we see our employment opportunities, that's an important piece. So in terms of strengthening the economy, the participation rates have been steady after dipping between 2014 and 2015. So I'm just going to gloss over those, but this is basically a snip from the documents that are attached to your report. And again, what it shows you, it gives us that baseline and that high growth scenario. And as we look at the economy recovering at different rates post-COVID, having those arranged in scenarios is quite helpful.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. When we're looking at apartments, and that's what I'm more referring to, with COVID, we've seen in the bigger cities, people are selling their apartments, moving out because they feel that it's not as safe. One issue there, so I'm just wondering about that. And secondly, when we're looking at our demographics, on other things we've got, we're seeing a huge increase in seniors.
Mm-hmm.
And are we looking at that where they like to have the single little patio homes instead of, I think there's a lot of concern about that, as well as even with public transportation, as we've seen, and our seniors are at the high-risk group, so a lot of them are very weary right now of using public transportation. So are we looking at that in our projections now based on the new COVID fears or trends?
In terms of housing type for seniors, that's absolutely considered in the land inventory and capacity analysis. In terms of it specific to COVID, and you're saying people looking at moving from apartments to more ground-oriented forms of housing, that specific scenario was not looked at as part of this study. However, I think that with the information we've got, we have the ability to look at that and see if those trends reflect.
And a follow-up on that too, and going back to, again, it's going back to the condos where we're hearing from lots of people that they can't get insurance for the condo buildings anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to be looked at and addressed? I know that there's a movement to get the provincial or federal government involved in it because some just can't get insurance, which means if you can't get insurance, you can't get a mortgage.
Right. Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong. We're seeing in Vancouver in particular and other places that have a higher proportion of strata, the challenges with achieving affordable insurance and what impact that might have on that housing form. Right now, we are seeing a continued uptake of the building of multifamily. In terms of taking that into consideration, I guess my answer at this point is that we haven't yet seen that impact on the demand for those units, but it is something that we would have to consider as part of that. But it wasn't a specific part of this study.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So again, these are some of the population by age group that you'll see in the report. I won't spend much time going over it. And what you've got here now is looking at the land inventory, basically our vacant and developable land. Actually, I think this is maybe a little bit out of sync. So now, in terms of our population projections and why they're important to us when we start looking at strategic land use planning, is looking at how much land we have in the city under different zoning and land use designations under the official community plan to meet the projected demand. So with residential land use, the highlights from the study that was done by Colliers was that we have an estimated 520 hectares of vacant land that's currently designated to allow residential uses, and that we're seeing apartment units as a growing type or form of housing proportional to single-family residential, which when we look at trying to accommodate for a range of different socioeconomic backgrounds and also making good use of our land is an important piece in getting a more diverse distribution. And what we're starting to see, particularly along our growth centers, you'll have noticed, is an increasing number of apartment units and density along our corridors. So in our urban nodes and corridors, here's some specific numbers. We've had recently over 2,300 units approved, with an additional close to 400 units in other areas of the city. So going back to where we go forward with Reimagine Nanaimo is we know that from our last OCP that we have policies that are working and getting us towards the densities of those walkable, more sustainable communities. And so knowing and evaluating that going forward is an important piece of how we decide to tweak or shift with our updated Reimagine Nanaimo official community plan. And you can see there's some more details there. And then what we're looking at in the future is that the demand for an additional 250 to 600 hectares of land by 2046. And that big range of a low to high growth demand is related to how we decide to grow, whether we are looking at two factors. High growth, if we have a high growth rate, but we continue to build in a lower density scenario, we're going to need more land. If we have a lower growth rate or even a high growth rate, but we develop land in a more concentrated fashion, there'll be less land needed to accommodate that residential need. So this is a heat map that shows population growth over the last 5 years distributed throughout our city in different neighborhoods, with the darkest red showing the highest growth areas and the dark blue the lowest. So again, looking at demand for housing, which in part might be driven by available land, but also where people are looking to live close to schools, shops, and other centers, as well as land availability. So that's what this map is showing here.
Councillor Besselbrook.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Ms. Bopal-Singh. I was just noticing the highest growth in the Chase River area, and I was just curious, what was the designation in the official community plan for that area in the past? And was that an area where there was planned growth to occur? Or?
Okay, I'm actually going to see if Mr. Schulberg might be able to help me. He was, I believe, did you work on the original neighborhood plan for that area?
That was just before my time. But I can say you're through the mayor to Councillor Gesselberg, you're looking at that large red stripe. Yeah, what that is that's a neighborhood designated area, but there's been a lot of subdivision activity and basically, which is indicated by, and that's why you see a dark red there. There's just been a lot of development activity over the past 5 years in that particular area. You'll notice the cool area to the right, which is where, of course, there's an urban node suggested to be happening with the Sandstone project and future development there. So because there has been no development per se happening in that area, it's a cooler light blue.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Just another question that I get asked quite often is how much development is too much development? Are we looking at that? So where we should be looking at capping, based on services? Like right now, we have schools that are over capacity, our hospitals over capacity, and the more we keep adding dense populations, more strains on those. Is that being looked at? And also, is this being shared with School District 68, Island Health, and the Nanaimo Hospital Board?
So the answers to both are, through the chair to Councillor Armstrong. Those questions are exactly the questions that we will be asking throughout the Reimagine process. The school district and also the hospital are very key to this process. They have their own, particularly with the hospital, they have their own scenarios in terms of demand because of course they're regional in terms of their scope and what they're serving. And then with the school districts, absolutely looking at our future land use planning and their capacity to serve the anticipated growth for the school-age population is critical. So that's going to evolve as part of this planning process, and both those organizations are key stakeholders in this. Okay, so then again, this shows the population breakdown and also by neighborhood planning area. So a key part of this study and also our process is looking at how this relates to our neighborhood planning, our neighborhood plans. So the Reimagine process is building that capacity into this and how we distribute growth across our city. So in terms of the housing projections, looking at that additional amount of land, the city is likely to have enough land for residential for all the future land use scenarios, both the high growth and the low growth. And again, ideally, we would want to, based on Council's aspirations around climate change and sustainability and walkable communities, looking at a higher density growth scenario is an important piece of that. And then what this is also saying here is that in areas where residential growth is not occurring, the city could consider partnerships that act as an anchor or catalyst for residential development. So this is the consultant's recommendations, and then how we work with that with our partners through the Reimagine process will determine how we put that into policy.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you, Your Worship. Could you just expand on that a little bit? What kind of partnerships would be considered? What would that look like?
So that could be looking at working potentially with partnerships with even our government of Snuneymuxw perhaps, and how they're developing. It could also involve looking at key developers and how we incent landowners who have been holding on to land to do something differently with those lands. I'm not sure that there was much more detail put in the report than that, but looking for opportunities to guide development in areas. One of the challenges for council is we can put all the best policies in place, but we don't own all the land. And so the drivers become different industrial employment, big residential developers who may choose to time their development at different times or not, or simply sit on land. And so there's opportunities to look at where we think, in partnership with the school district, the health authority, and a range of services, well, where would be best to locate additional housing in sync with those different objectives that we want to achieve. So I don't know if that's a good answer that's broad enough, but that's where I would see that. Thank you. So here are some other highlights and recommendations from the report, and these are all considerations as we come back to you and work with our community and stakeholders around what would be acceptable in terms of policies to support growth where we want it. So council could consider maximum building heights so that variances don't have to be sought out. Suggestion of doing a citywide parking study to look at reducing parking requirements for affordable housing. We have already delved into that in the past, but looking at that again. And then looking at continual investment in public transportation. Again, that link to walkable communities, and then linking back to Councillor Armstrong's comment about the linkage with changes in use of different transportation forms and how that evolves with land use. So again, looking at the city allowing maximum densities so that there's more floor area. So looking at what policies we want to put in place to incent different forms of development, and looking at whether we can balance the demand for housing in locations where we want it as a trade-off for different amenities that we would normally achieve. So that is definitely a key thing for council to consider as we move along.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. My question actually was specifically on that point. In the executive summary, this is on page 9, I believe it's the last bullet, where it refers to relaxing our density bonusing or eliminating it. Not necessarily something I agree with. So my question is, how much of these how much of these recommendations are we incorporating into this? Because I do know that we're going to be looking at our density bonus and we're going to be looking at our community amenity contributions. It's supposed to be happening during this time of the OCP. Is there some sort of order in which these things are getting done?
Well, first of all, this is ultimately the recommendations of the consultant have to be balanced with a range of other background information, including the appetite of both the community and the stakeholders and how we give that feedback to council, and ultimately what council's appetite is for shifts around this. And I think there's a lot of pros and cons that have to be laid out, sort of cost-benefit analysis, if you will, around what are council and the community's objectives. Like if the primary objective is housing, and that's the most important piece, and that's viewed in some ways as an amenity and seen as a way of influencing housing availability and affordability, and there's going to be many views as to whether it actually does that, versus amenities that would come through the development. And of course, the market impacts that too. And so it depends if we end up being a community that is very attractive post-COVID and we have a higher growth scenario, that's very different than if we are a low growth scenario but struggling to meet our housing needs in terms of our economics. I'm not sure if that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong and Councillor Hemmons.
Just have another one that on affordability. Are we looking at how much our local policies and regulations are adding to the cost of a home? Because we hear that from the developers, you know, some of your policies cost us $80,000 more, $100,000 more. At the UBCM 2 years ago, that was a big thing from the university professors, that local policies in Vancouver have increased housing costs there by between $100,000 to $200,000. Are we looking at that?
That is something that is, I think, part of the overall question of the impacts of the policies as we come up with them. Specifically, I guess I don't have an answer for you right this second. But looking back to our affordable housing strategy and looking at the foundation of that, and then working with our different stakeholders, the tricky part is each consultant will give a different study, and housing advocates the same, around what the impacts would be on housing based on different policies. And it's interesting to see how that unfolds, because oftentimes you don't know the impact until you've actually put policies in place. So I would say that as we go through this process and we come back to you with recommendations that could have that impact, that we'd be looking at that in the financial analysis. Like, what do we anticipate would be the long-term impact?
Just follow up on that, just because like the ones that went up there across from Woodgrove Mall, you know, that were supposed to be affordable. Well, I was looking at that, a one bedroom's $1,500. That's where they're starting. And when you question them, they said, oh, it's because of all the additional costs we had to up it. Like, to me, $1,500 for one bedroom is not really that affordable for a lot of people. So I find it interesting that that's what this developer that was supposed to be bringing these affordable condos in figures is affordable. So that's why it'd be interesting from a developer's perspective as well. You know, what are they saying? And I would like them, when they're making these comments, to actually put it to paper to say, well, your tree bylaw cost me this amount of money, or your added parking cost me this, you know, so that we actually know exactly what the added costs are to them from the city's perspective, not from, you know, code that's mandatory, but just from our own little policies. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of points. One, if I may, in response to Councillor Armstrong, I would rather see more focus on holding not developers to account, but when someone says I'm building affordable housing, that we actually have a criteria that defines affordable housing that we're all using, so we understand that that's what we should be expecting, because I find it's a term that gets thrown out a lot, and you're right, what we see as affordable is not necessarily affordable for the average person. So specifically to these, though, a process question. So the city should increase the maximum allowable density. The previous slide referenced allowing height, density, so we don't have to go for variances. These are recommendations from the consultant that will then go back to the public and for confirmation, correct? Like, it's council's, we're going to be setting this framework, but then ultimately this does go to the public. So these seem very development focused, but I understand that there is going to be a community focus, and that's the OCP consultation to say, oh yeah, we actually agree. Because as it reads right now, for me, this is, it's about growth. And are we always going to use the framework of infinite growth as our planning framework? So there's that. I'm just curious for your comments on that. And then overall, a comment that I have for the whole presentation is, how do we make this digestible for residents? Like, how do we take these massive reports and then use that to give the public knowledge to then help us in our consultation?
Okay,
Thank you.
so I'll try and, through the chair, I'll try and break that down into two parts. In terms of the different policies we might put in place and balancing that with housing affordability, and I think perhaps what I'm hearing is the guarantee that developments that come forward and achieve accommodations by council, whether it's extra height or density, that there's some benefit to the city guaranteeing that there is an affordable component. And so right now, council knows that we provide reductions in development cost charges for housing projects that guarantee a certain level of affordability. Now, typically those are nonprofit type agreements, but there are a range of other ways of looking at how you can achieve that in order for people to acquire those, the trade-off, right? That there is also a way of ensuring that a certain number of units meet the criteria for affordability. And it is a really tricky one. We see, cities like Vancouver, Victoria, even Prince George struggling with the very same issue, that you can increase the number of units all you want, but it doesn't necessarily translate to affordability. So, and then your second point, which is a really important one, we're providing you with really technical documents, right? This is, if you have insomnia, this is what you read, right? What we are doing with our consultants, Lanark, in the Reimagine process is putting together some fun, accessible, technical background papers. And although I'm using the word technical, the word is accessible, that give the key highlights of this without you having to digest the whole report. So that is a really key piece of communicating not just these, but other background reports, whether it's climate change and resiliency, and putting those pieces into 1 and 2 pagers graphically that make it accessible and digestible, not just for our adult population, but also our school-age population as well, because they're the ones who are going to inherit the policies we put in place. So, thank you. Okay.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not so much a question, and I don't expect you to have the answer today, but I would be very curious in the future on that question of density bonusing and those sort of policies, to know how often they've actually been used. And people have come in and shot for densities over the zoning. And the reason I ask that is I think that in a place like Vancouver, where there's a lot of constraints of available land, they might make a lot of sense because people don't have any other choice. But in a context like Nanaimo, where there is relatively a lot of available land, those policies might be not well utilized because it just doesn't make sense when you can just buy another parcel and build to a certain threshold. So I would be curious to know over time when and how often they've been used and sort of what have the market conditions been like when they have been utilized.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Brown, I would turn to Mr. Lindsay on that question with his long period of time with the city. But I think that's a very good, fair point about the difference between our local context and the wider picture. I don't know if Mr. Lindsay has any comments about the long-term uptake of different density bonusing type.
Mr. Lindsay.
Your Worship, I certainly concur with Councillor Brown's statement. It would be good to have a more fulsome understanding of how the impacts of these policies. And I would say, in general, our density bonusing provisions are relatively new in our zoning bylaw. We have not had them for many years, and we've been continually evolving with them over the last couple of years to respond to things like changes to the building code for energy standards. So I think in our next round of amendments, it may be worth to step back and look at how they've been addressed. I certainly understand the comment about there's land and there seems to be opportunity without looking at density bonusing, but I would say those days are coming to an end, and we are seeing property owners, developers wanting to make sure that they can achieve maximum densities on properties because the days of the easy, flat to develop properties are gone. And it's more challenging properties to develop, more costly properties to develop, and as a result, you need to have the density to pay for those offsets.
Councillor Thorpe.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of comments. Really interesting to try and look ahead 25, 26 years. I tried to reimagine myself 26 years from now, and it wasn't very pretty, but it's still fun to try. I guess a couple of comments. I found this report, just by its nature, focused so much on growth and development. And as Mr. Lindsay, I think, just alluded to, the days of the developing easy flat lots is just about done, which is going to drive up the costs of those developments. And it seems to me that our city's growth has largely, recently at least, been the result of our relative low cost of living compared to the Lower Mainland or even southern Vancouver Island. And I sort of see that gap probably narrowing in the future, which could impact our rate of growth. So I don't know if that's something that's been taken into account or talked about at this point yet. And the other point I'd like to make is that the growth that I've noticed, certainly in my own neighborhood, is either younger families coming here for jobs, which means it's going to be increasingly important for Nanaimo to try and attract those workers as we're going to need them. And secondly, the older clientele coming from the Lower Mainland, retiring, selling their medium-priced house in Vancouver and being able to buy a luxury condo or a nice waterfront lot here and still put money in the bank. And those people are coming here for the amenities, the lifestyle, the oceanfront, and the attractions that we can offer them. So those are considerations that I think we really need to look carefully at as well when we look at our population possible expansion in the future and projections. Is that going to be covered more in a separate report? Because I just found this so focused on development.
At this point in time, we don't have a separate report planned to address those specific aspects of, I guess, economic and population drivers around. But what you're talking about is, sorry, through the chair, and what you're talking about, is it more around policies that impact what type of people move to Nanaimo and drive up the growth? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't expect an answer. I'm just curious because it seems to me such a complex puzzle to try and put together when you're making predictions. There's so many factors to consider, and I just found this very heavily involved in one area. Mm-hmm. And in terms of some of the suggestions regarding density bonusing or variances or so on, to me, I always think those need to be looked at very carefully on an individual basis. I've said that several times. So I might have trouble just making a blanket approval of such a thing, but just my comment. Thanks.
And through the chair to Councillor Thorpe, these are the very discussions we expect to have out of the Reimagine process. I think you've seen that Council has many checkpoints where feedback gets given to you. We provide you with the input that we've received from the community, and of course, the priorities for community. This is a background document. The recommendations are the recommendations that come from, yes, one perspective. And at the same time, with the growth scenarios, we have objectives the community will have around housing affordability, community well-being, access to transportation, climate change, environmental protection, and a whole range of recreation and other purposes. And so how do those feed into Council's priorities to achieve those different goals? And if Council is uncertain that one approach, whether it's one of the recommendations in here, won't work, you absolutely don't have to take that, because this will be balanced in with a whole other stream of priorities, whether it's, for example, reports that come forward on climate resiliency and how that impacts our land use, economic development, the housing affordability, and what we anticipate the impacts of different policies will be. So The recommendations here are simply the recommendations coming forward. It's that we have to balance as we come back to you as staff, amalgamating many other pieces of information. So I'm not sure if that thoroughly answers your question, but that's...
I'm not sure I even phrased my question very well, but thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. So just for clarification, understanding, this is the beginning of the process. And so one of the suggestions, like when we talk about we get these variances all the time, well, building construction changes. So it was saying that National Building Code is now going to allow wood frame structures to be up to 12 stories in height. And so that's the type of thing we're talking about, that right now we've already set. And if you want to build it higher, even though you're permitted, you'd have to come to us for a variance. So this is something we want to see, we change the bylaw.
Potentially, that's
Yeah.
one aspect. The increase in height too also, with that type of frame, is also an economic piece for
Right.
developers as well. But there are other areas where we allow up to 6 floors where there may be consideration that in certain areas we want the density of a certain type of form of housing. And you may wish to look at what's the pros and cons of having a blanket increase versus a more site-specific.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of commercial now, moving on. So again, the highlights are, I think, as I mentioned, our employment sectors have been growing, particularly those reliant on heavy and light industrial space. And as we get into the demand for industrial space, this has come before council before, the issues of use of land for industrial versus other types of commercial. And then our experiencing demand for office space and a gradual growth. So we've got an estimated 60 hectares of land for commercial development. And then looking forward in terms of new development, we've had about 30 hectares over the past 10 years, half of which have been in the areas that we want to see them in, which is our corridor areas and our growth centers. And then we're expecting in our primary and secondary trades to see population growth of between 227,000. And when we're talking the trade area, this is just to remember, Nanaimo is a regional center on the island. We attract, as you know, people who come to work and shop, and even perhaps sometimes use some of our other amenities from the surrounding area. So when we're talking trade areas, it's a wider area than our actual city boundaries. And this is, the consultants looked at what that generates for us. So that those are important factors when we're looking, much like we look at the regional hospital and the population it serves, we are a center that our economic growth is also driven by the relationship with our surrounding areas. So here you see a look at our primary trade area and our secondary trade area. So primary being more kind of closer to the city boundaries, and then the secondary looking kind of more regionally, where we have people. And again, what does that do in terms of our population projections, both high and low? So we are expected with commercial to have enough land to accommodate the future projected employment growth plans by 2041. And that's including the additional 20 to 30 to 40 hectares. So again, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this again shows you how that different types of floor space for service looks between 2031 and 2041, and the additional square footage that's anticipated. So again, it's looking at, rather than, this is a recommendation from the consultants, rather than providing more land for commercial use, that the city should identify a strategy to support the overall health of its retail nodes, particularly downtown and South Nanaimo. Strong focus should be paid towards the retail environment within downtown Nanaimo, and then it speaks to the importance of that. So this is nothing new to council. Council certainly in the past supported various initiatives for quick wins in the downtown and things to really strengthen the resilience of our commercial center in that area. So this is one of the report's highlights that seems to align with some of the things that council's already been working towards. You'll see that quick fix interim projects and events that again look at that placemaking and the importance of the downtown. And then looking at heavy emphasis towards ground floor commercial units. Again, that design focus, looking at even the things that you've done post-COVID with the street parking and the use of street parking areas for patio space and livening up the downtown. So one of the things that has been also highlighted in this report is the stress on businesses with access to people who are trained to work in them. And one of the suggestions here is to partner with local academic institutions, so that would be like VIU and other community colleges, to create a retail training program to help supply more staff. Pre-COVID, one of the challenges we'd heard from some employers was not just housing affordability for workers on smaller incomes to live and afford to work, and the challenge for retailers to keep employees. And so that's an important part of our vibrancy, is not just having businesses open, but how can they sustain themselves with a strong workforce. So the other one is to ensure that commercial activity is not too spread out. And one of the terms I might use is to really watch what might be called leapfrog development. So making sure you have that concentration that gives that diversity instead of having different types of commercial spread out in an uncoordinated fashion. That you, again, it comes back to creating those vibrant spaces where people can live and access services on foot or by transit in concentrated areas. So those kind of livable centers.
Councillor Hemmens has a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. So could you go back to the previous slide, please?
Sure.
And one more. So the one previous, this one, as well as the one in front, all seem to me like recommendations that were in our 2008 OCP. Mm-hmm. Like making sure that we do ground level retail and that there's that transition between space and street, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm curious, at what point do we take the 2008 OCP and say, these were good policies and this is how we did on them. This is where the gaps are. These are the policies that no longer apply. Because all of this is great. I think we can all agree that we need to invest in downtown, et cetera, but I'd like some measure of how we've done to date and how the community would like to see investment going forward. So if you have any sense of when that will come before us and how that will be communicated to the public, that would be great.
Perfect. Through the chair, through the mayor to Councillor Hemmens. That is again part of those technical background documents to give not only council but the community a sense of where we come from. And one of the reasons for doing this background study is to show us how effective has the 2008 OCP been, right? And one of the things you're seeing is that confirmation that there are things we want to carry on doing. And that it takes more than 10 years for things to start percolating and working, and for our development community to start, based on the economy, invest along those lines. And so, as the last few years have shown, we are seeing that being effective, and then we have the consultant recommending a continuation of that. So in terms of those accessible backgrounders, it's explaining not just to council, but also the community and our stakeholders where we come from, what's been working well and why, showing them examples of that, and then explaining, here are some options if we continue with our existing policies versus other options, which might be shifting those pieces. So in terms of when we come back to you with those, I think we're looking at early fall, maybe even before that. Because we're trying to start things in July, but I'm going to tentatively say, I know we've got some drafts before us from the consultant right now. I think last week we got them, and so we'll be reviewing those and seeing how that fits. Yeah, but the intention is very much so to do those measures of how far we've come. And this study, technical as it is one of the foundational documents in measuring that success or challenges.
Councillor Armstrong.
Just to follow up on that, too, I too would be very interested to know just how much the city has spent to try and improve downtown and other areas of the city. So that would be an interesting report for me, because we hear that a lot from different businesses, et cetera, that a lot of the city focuses on revitalizing downtown, and areas like Terminal Park and Country Club get left behind. So it would be interesting to note just how much we are spending in various parts of the city to help improve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and through the chair, I'm just wondering how I'm doing for time, because I am aware that there are other things on the agenda here. So.
Go again.
Okay. Okay, so again, one of the other recommendations is looking at this is something a little bit different here, looking at small-scale convenience nodes within neighborhoods within that 5-minute walk to most residents. So we're seeing strong development along our corridors, and including housing really starting to align, particularly multifamily in those areas. And this is a suggestion that the city could accommodate small parcels to accommodate smaller commercial in certain neighborhoods where there isn't that 5 minutes walking distance to stores. And this is an important piece when we engage our neighborhoods as part of this process. And being able to look at the demographics and the growth by neighborhood, and then go to the neighborhoods and capture that information will give us a sense of what's needed in those neighborhoods and what the neighborhoods would accept. So, okay. Then in terms of institutional space, we did get feedback. The consultants did engage with various groups, both in the nonprofit social sector, social service sector, as well as the culture sector. And one of the things that has repeatedly come up, and council has heard this as well, is the need for affordable space to support the different entities. So one of the suggestions here, and again, it's a suggestion, is that the city could look at reusing or revitalizing vacant buildings, look at space sharing models, and look at also providing financial assistance and negotiating leases with landlords. So again, pros and cons to this, balancing this out with affordable housing and other pieces, but another consideration as we go forward in this process. So industrial, we're getting there. So this one is one where we have a higher demand with limited supply. And so across our region, industrial land, particularly of a certain size and capacity with appropriate servicing, is scarce. So we've got around 661 hectares, primarily in Duke Point and the Northfield Boxwood areas. And we've got an estimated 64 with an additional 10 hectares of land with construction occurring on it. So really, in terms of growth scenarios, we've got approximately, with a high growth for industrial, and again, this study, we have to see how things evolve. I think Councillor Bonner has pointed out, how do you evolve with different types of industry and business? But under the current scenario, we're looking at approximately 18 years of supply for certain types of industrial. This is giving you the industrial vacancy rates by region, and you can see in the red at the bottom, Nanaimo certainly has a very low vacancy rate of its industrial lands. So this is one of the recommendations, is to create new industrial supply, given that the demand is expected to exceed our capacity to meet it. And so some specific suggestions in the report about looking at the lots south of the Nanaimo Parkway, behind the Cavallotti Lodge, encouraging and engaging with industrial lot loan owners over a 2-hectare size, and looking at ways to support and incentivize the development of this land. So then looking at industrial for areas like Ocean View, and assessing that and seeing whether that's viable. And again, these are key foundational pieces in our Reimagine process around priorities. And then looking at ways to support developers in constructing a higher use of industrial lands. So looking at different incentives around building heights and setbacks, so forth. And then this one is also, again, key, is looking at the amalgamation of land outside of the urban containment boundary, particularly lands south of the city along the Island Highway. So those are, again, key pieces for us to look at as we reimagine our city. Okay, and then wrapping up with institutional land use. So this institutional, by that we mean land for schools, hospitals, other types of services and supports in our city. we know we have a high degree of employment on these types of lands. So we currently have only about 6 hectares of 230 zone land that appears to be vacant. And so we're anticipating a shortfall both in terms of both staff and facilities to support our aging population. So again, back to healthcare sector, Nanaimo Ladysmith School District is anticipating a shortage of space to accommodate both elementary and secondary students, and this relates directly to Councillor Armstrong's highlighting both young families moving here, or sorry, it might have been Councillor Thorpe, and also an aging population as people retire here and growth in those sectors. So again, showing you that those considerations and work with the school district are fundamental to this work. That's what that's showing. Our seniors population projections, and then recommendations, and we're already on this one, working closely with School District 68 as they plan for the future. And then also looking at land demand for seniors housing, long-term care facilities, assisted living, working with Island Health to identify that. And again, this work also ties back to our work with the Health and Housing Task Force, and some of that work is also foundational and links into land use with this as well. And with that, I will close for questions.
I think you've been asked out, so to speak, during the course of the presentation. Oh, Councillor Bonner.
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, if I may. Going back to School District 68 and projected enrollment, I noticed that there's a number of schools that are closed and could be torn down and rebuilt. Was that taken into consideration as part of this study?
My understanding is that it was. I can confirm that. I don't know if Mr. Schulberg, if you've got those details on hand. I can confirm that, but that was certainly part of that, particularly, and it's not just the school facilities, but where they located in terms of the population growth that the school district anticipates. The other interesting thing with the school district, of course, is we're seeing some interesting projects and partnerships. The Teitahan one on 5th Street, for example, looking at, school district sites and how do you combine a range of uses and that efficiency of land use that also promotes a more inclusive community. And so with the school district, some of the opportunities there are both educational, but also amenities, partnerships with the Parks, Rec and Culture Department, for example, and then also housing. So there's an interesting piece there as we go forward where I guess the divisions of land use are becoming, with our recently supported projects with Council's MOU with 5th Street, for example, evolving. And I think that also plays into the school district piece as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who can answer this question, but have there ever been any, in your experience or knowledge, schools that have been built with residential components to them?
In Vancouver, I think there's at least 2 examples where BC Housing has partnered with the school district in more the downtown area. Chris, are you aware of any?
I'm not aware of any, but certainly I'm aware of a lot of old schools that were rehabilitated into residential use. That's very common across North America.
Okay, thank you.
However, there's examples both within the same site, and then in Vancouver, I can think of one example where there's like a high school with housing above it, like multi-stories of a housing, yeah, in the sort of Denman-Davie area, I believe. I better confirm that before I speak from imagination, so.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship, and many thanks for the presentation. One question I have is related to schools as well, because obviously they're hard to predict and they're doing their facilities planning, but I've noticed that the school district has been switching more to academy programs, which results in sort of out of catchment area students traveling across the city. I'm just curious, how do we accommodate that in our planning? So, and then you hear about constantly switching catchment areas. So neighborhoods are sort of divided now between different types of schools, and they have one kid going somewhere and another going to another school. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of when we're trying to create these more walkable communities and a lot of the decisions the school district is making around how kids go to school and for what reasons, how do we accommodate that into our sort of long-range planning documents?
Through the chair to Councillor Brown, that's a question that we hope will be answered through our work with the school district. Recently, I think we've seen a phenomenal change in education due to COVID, where people are engaging a lot more in online and what that's doing in terms of people's transportation to different locations. But in the long term, we would be looking to them for their analysis of what their forecasts are around the neighborhoods, the facilities they currently own, the capacity, and where they see education going, and also delving into the school districts, looking at school sites for intergenerational learning, more than the traditional K to 12. Right? And then also the childcare aspect on sites as well. We're seeing, of course, the school district looking at their role in providing 0 to 5, all on the same site. And so that's another piece that's very significant in terms of institutional land use and how efficiently it's used. So while I don't have the answer for you, I think that through our relationships with the school district, I anticipate that we would be leaning on them for what they see in their forecasts and how they are, what models they're using in their forecasts for learning and what that does in terms of both land use and that connectivity, because of course, again, it relates to demand on our parks and our trails and our commercial centers, right, and the vibrancy of all those pieces, so, yeah.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Last one. I'll be quick. It may be hard to answer. COVID's only mentioned once in the report, and specifically say that all this data was gathered before it.
Yes.
But then the report seems to go on as if COVID was never there anyway, and it's not going to be there in the future. So how are we going to be able to know when these things, when COVID is changing our future, which we sort of know what it is, but how are we going to plan for it? And how will we know what that looks like?
Okay, through the chair to Councillor Bonner. Not that this has kept me up at night, but one of the things that I think was a benefit of the way the consultants structured both a low growth and a high growth scenario in terms of just sheer demand and what we're looking at, that's very beneficial. The challenge with any of these reports, just like population, is it's almost like looking at an 8-ball. There's so many factors that influence. You get a shift where suddenly Nanaimo is the center of, say, creating masks for COVID, and suddenly there's a demand for something you never saw that we wouldn't have even anticipated a year ago. But having those low and high growth scenarios allows us to adapt and see, because we still don't know, we could be one of the communities that really slows down, or due to our attractiveness compared to other areas of Canada, we could see a rapid recovery. And I guess my comfort level with the Collier's report is the fact that they gave us both low growth and high growth. Outside of COVID, COVID just becomes another factor, as if it had been maybe our mill closing or something really significant, our regional hospital suddenly getting a huge investment, and suddenly we have, 2,000 more workers in town. I think by having that built in to the scenarios and those tables that allow us to kind of shift and say, okay, we're seeing the population go up this much, this is going to be the impact and demand on housing over here and our demand. So I guess that's my personal comfort level in terms of adapting. And in terms of how we do watch our economy and our community recover, I guess the Mayor's Task Force on Economic Recovery and the Economic Development Strategy will be key in watching that. I wish I had a crystal ball, but I guess that's my personal comfort level with the way the study was done. And we did ask them to acknowledge COVID, because obviously they had done the bulk of this work prior. But I really feel it's pretty adaptable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Much appreciate the presentation, the quality of it, and your tolerance for all our questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Because we know you stay up late at night and work too hard. We've seen your email times.
Okay.
Mr. Lindsay, I see Mr. Moss, Mr. Backhouse are here. Are we expecting Chief Superintendent Miller today?
Your Worship, I did speak with Superintendent Miller earlier, and we were expecting him this afternoon. I don't see him yet in the building, but I understand he will be joining us.
We'll send the ex-cop to find the fresh one.
Your Worship, maybe when we're waiting, and I know, Councillor Armstrong stepped out, but I just wanted to reiterate much of what Ms. Bhopal-Singh was stating, and also what I think Council demonstrated through your questions, is that this is very much a process about balancing priorities and balancing interests, and these are two documents that are foundational. But I want to be clear, if anybody's watching from the community, these do not necessarily translate into new policy documents. They're simply there as foundation documents that you'll look at and balance and evaluate and measure against all of the other priorities that you have, whether they're priorities that come out of your climate action work, whether they're priorities that come out of housing, whether they're priorities, and I think sometimes this gets understated, but the role that Nanaimo plays as the major urban center in the regional district, and the role you play under that regional growth strategy. All of those things factor into the policy works yet to come, but very early days, and these are not recommendations that are in front of Council for endorsement at this point, simply recommendations coming from the consultant that'll get weighed against all of the other inputs and hopefully the extensive public engagement sessions that we're about to embark on. So.
Your Worship, Superintendent Miller is about 5 minutes away. Do you want to take a 5-minute break? And allow him to
I think that would be wise. This is an important presentation. I know Mr. Backhouse and Mr. Moss are used to coming before council and are patient people, right?
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'm going to almost immediately turn this over to Mr. Corson, but I did want to mention, of course, this comes from Council's motion on May the 25th. So just 4 weeks ago today that you made this motion, and I'm sure Mr. Corson will cover this, but in that time, we've had meetings with the Old City Quarter, both internally with our bylaw department and with the RCMP. So this is a report that's a result of those discussions, and there's a framework and budget that's attached, but I'll allow Mr. Corson to walk through the report.
Mr. Corson.
Great, thanks, Your Worship. As usual, Mr. Lindsay stole my opening piece, so that's good. I'll just jump into it.
It's typical of upper management.
I know, steals all the good stuff. So the motion that Council passed on the 25th of May was for staff to work with the Old City Quarter Business Improvement Association and the Old City Quarter Health and Safety Alliance to develop a framework and funding strategy for restoring safety in the Old City Quarter, and that a staff report be prepared for Council. So we met with the representatives from the Old City Quarter, and Mr. Lindsay said we met with our bylaw officers and with the RCMP. The framework that was presented to Council by the OCQ in their initial letter is really the foundation of the framework that's in the staff report. We have made some amendments to it based on our discussions with everybody and the feedback we've received. So what the Old City Quarter representatives are proposing is as a trial, a 6-month trial, or 6.5 months from now to the end of the year. And the idea is using various sets of tools to help address nighttime security and safety, and also help address some of the cleanliness issues in the neighborhood, which I think Council is well aware of. The actual area that this would apply to is the Old City Quarter, so the area defined by the BIA. And the reason for that is because it's an area that actually has it's the only BIA improvement area, actual defined area, so it doesn't apply to the rest of the downtown. The idea is that the BIA would hire 3 safety officers who patrol the neighborhood roughly from 10 p.m. to 6 in the morning, 7 days a week. And they would look after the properties in the Old City Quarter, and if there was people sleeping in doorways, etc., they would ask the folks to move on and give them direction to places they could go to for service. During the daytime, in the summer, the OCQ would hire summer students who would be ambassadors and would and help reestablish street activity in the Old City Quarter, which has been disrupted through COVID. There'd be, one of the concerns that the OCQ's raised is the idea of a one-stop phone number that people could call, that residents and businesses in the OCQ could call. So there'd be a helpline established. And I'm sure Mr. Moss will take you through this. But the idea is you'd call this number, and then if it was a minor safety issue, that would be directed to the safety officers or to the RCMP or bylaw. Obviously, if it's a serious issue, it'd be directed right to 911. If there was some garbage that needed to be picked up, they would direct that to the right people as well. They also have discussed working with the John Howard Society, who would provide the service of cleaning up on both public and private property. So right now, the city picks up on public property. Through this initiative, the John Howard Society, who the city does contract with, would also go onto private property and pick up refuse. As a trial program, the idea is to do a review every month and see what's working and what's not working. For instance, one of the things we've discussed is the hours of operation. It might make sense to have some of the safety officers maybe start earlier when there's more people coming home after work or in the evening. But again, that would be amended going forward. So again, this is a trial, would run to the end of the year. And then for 2021, we'd be able to look at the trial and see what it worked, and perhaps it would be expanded to the rest of the downtown, or specifically upgraded for the Old City Quarter, either through a BA bylaw amendment or through a service levy, which we'd have to explore. So the cost for this trial is estimated to be $195,000, with the Old City Quarter paying 30%, and then the city paying $136,500. Staff have identified the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve Fund as a source for that funding. Again, this is to the end of the year. Now, you'll note in the staff report, in the discussion section, we raise a couple of issues with council. One is the idea of broader safety in the downtown core outside, not just the Old City Quarter, and the implication that a program like this might have if it's just focused on the OCQ. We also mentioned the fact that you might not be aware, but the city does have and pays for security in the downtown overnight. And this has largely been focused on our parkades because they're a high target area. So we do have contract security who work from 3 in the afternoon to 11, and then from 11 to 7 in the morning looking after our parkades. And we pay just under $140,000 a year for that service. I also want council to be aware that obviously we do have other people providing security. We have 148 RCMP officers. We have 8 bylaw officers working across the city. In terms of cleanup, council just allocated $187,000 for the social disorder response team, and we also pay $45,000 a year to the John Howard Society to help us with cleanup. So in terms of the options we present to council, one is to advance with the recommendation as modified in the staff report with the OCQ to do a pilot, the trial program for 6 months. The second option we present to council is to take the portion of those funds, about $83,000, and actually allocate that to extra security through the existing contract we have, and that would be for all of downtown, so not just the OCQ. And then the third option is to continue to operate with the same level of safety and security that we're using at the moment. So I wanted council to be aware that you are spending a lot of money on the downtown in terms of cleanliness and security, so don't feel that you're not spending. There's no resources going, there are significant resources going in, and I feel that there's a significant amount of money that's going in there. And that's it. So I think Mr. Moss has a presentation. Yeah.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. There was a pilot done on this in 2010 to 2012 for the downtown core. Do we have the results of that? And my second point is that obviously if we're doing it for the downtown, which we look at as basically Commercial Street in Victoria, I personally believe then we need to do it for all. There's been significant investments in that street downtown for years and years. And I know that there's the patrols down there, but my understanding is they only come up to a certain area and they don't bother up with the old town. Is that correct?
The existing security?
Yeah, like they've got a patrol area that stops, I believe, at Victoria.
Yeah, so I think, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, The security did cover a larger area, but because the parkades became such a target for theft, that they focused solely on the parkades the last year and a bit.
And then my last point was the Colin, that was done by the DNBIA back in 2014. Would we be doing a similar thing that was very successful for them? I don't know if you're aware that program did exist, the one that they're talking about?
Yeah, there's been, I don't know if there was a summary of it or the highlight, if the report was done in terms of evaluation. We've heard positive things about it. I don't think there's a document that would direct you to how the improvement in safety.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Corson. I'm just curious what you meant by the term safety officer. You used it quite a bit, and I'm just wondering if that's different than a security.
It'd be very similar to a security guard.
Similar or identical?
Identical.
Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. Apart from the old city quarter, the downtown, which is just kind of evolving, and the Victoria Crescent, do we have any other BIAs in Nanaimo? Or is it just those three?
I believe the only one we have is the actual old city quarter.
Okay, thank you. That's what you mentioned earlier. And following up on Councillor Armstrong's point, do we have any metrics on, so we repositioned our security guards to parkades. Were we successful? Did that prevent break-ins? I just want to make sure that those are accurately positioned.
Yeah, so we get daily or at least weekly reports from the security company that identifies the incidents they had. And I think it's been very challenging downtown. Whether the current level of security is sufficient, it probably isn't.
So do we, oh, God love you. Do we have the ability to look at pulling our security guards to the parkade and what the crime rate was then versus now we have security guards in the parkades and our crime has been reduced?
Yeah, we could certainly go through the reports and provide some feedback on that and how it shifted quite quickly.
Yeah, and I'm not even speaking shifting. I just want, was it useful? I'm hearing that we did it, but I'm not hearing that it was effective. And that's what I'd like to use in my decision making.
Okay, yeah, I'm afraid I don't have the information for you right now.
Councillor Turley. Councillor Turley. Unmute yourself.
Here we are. Your Worship, I have a question with regard to the contract with the John Howard Society. The current one, is that just for cleaning up public spaces, or is it clean up private spaces as well?
Your Worship, my understanding is it's just public spaces at the moment.
Okay, so that's the one concern I would have with this proposal, is if we're using city funds to clean up private property, needs to be a way of utilizing the funds for things other than that in the programs.
Yes, I believe the idea is to provide more resourcing so that they could actually get on, so they could do, in addition, do private property as well as the public property. So this would be an expansion of their contract.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Corson. I think we'll now hear from the delegation. And Ms. Gurry, that's 5 minutes. Mr. Moss, Mr. Backhouse, welcome. Just a minute to clean up a little here.
Safe. Thank you.
You know the drill, 5 minutes. I'll give you 1 minute warning and then we're on to questions.
Okay,
Welcome.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and councillors. Following Dale would have been easy. Following Bill is going to be quite difficult. He covered off most of the metrics of the policy, of the procedures. So what I think I'll do is I'll just hit it from a bit of a different angle than I was presenting. So some of this presentation will make sense. Some probably will not. I'm Darren. This is Doug. I think we're known to most of you. We're here representing a group of private property owners who came together to work with the OCQ to basically develop the pilot program we're talking about today in response to the challenges that downtown's facing today. The group that's been working on this is a group that's been living the downtown a combined 35 years. We've worked, owned property, volunteered, all with the intent of helping downtown Nanaimo achieve its potential. Through that time, we've seen many iterations and many challenges, ranging from the full gamut. And I think it's important just to reiterate that the effects of homelessness, drug use, and mental illness has existed that entire time, and different iterations, different programs have been in place. I think the reason we're here today and the way we've been putting effort into it the last month especially is that in the last 2.5 years, the landscape has changed. So in the 2 years building up to 2020, I think it's safe to say from our property owner's perspective, the effects of those three issues has grown to the point where we've seen tenants, instead of renewing their leases downtown, will move to the north end. Residents who would try to move downtown or buy condos downtown look elsewhere. And that's disheartening, and for all of us who spent all the time trying to build up the opposite image. But the last 4 months have been something quite different. As people were isolating at home and working from home, downtown evacuated, and it's been a significant change in the effect of those three issues. We're now at the point that people are actively looking to break leases and move away from downtown. People aren't considering coming downtown, they're actively trying to leave downtown. And our position is that if we don't take really clear, consistent, and a bit visionary steps towards changing this, the efforts of that last 30 years is going to be undone fairly quickly. We've been around the block a few times, and we understand that what we're proposing tonight is but a piece in a puzzle, and that it isn't meant to achieve all that needs to be done. But I think that every level of participant has a different ability to affect change, and this is where we thought we would be able to affect efficient change to make an immediate impact to try to slow down some of the exodus of downtown. So not going into all the details of the program, what I might do is talk a little bit about why we set this program up, because it has a little bit different heart to it than we heard from Mr. Corson. The goal was to make sure that users of downtown, be it residences or business owners or clients, felt heard and supported. It's easy enough to think about putting extra security downtown, cleaning up messes, but those are very short-term responses to a 30, 40, 50-year-old challenge. This program is set up to try to allow people to reach out easily and effectively, voice their concern, have that concern heard and passed on to the appropriate entity, have the problem addressed, and get feedback so that they don't feel alone in the challenge. That's probably one of the biggest things we hear when we talk to people is respect the RCMP, respect bylaw. Most people who work downtown understand how overloaded those services are. So there's no ill intent towards it, but those organizations don't have the capacity to do that touch base, feedback, adjust.
1 minute.
Thank you. So this program is set up to do just that. It's intended to be a one spot where you can call in, where you can be heard, see the responses. The addition of the safety officer piece, and to Councillor Brown's question, I think a safety officer is different than a security officer. I believe that's somebody who comes from a company that's able to adapt, learn new skills, and assist, not just enforce. So our goal would be to have somebody who would be willing to engage and help, not just walk the streets and move people along, but to have conversations and support where needed. The last piece I want to mention is this program set up to be light, adjustable, and adaptable. So it is a pilot. It's supposed to be using contract services that can scale as we need to without making long-term salary commitments. It's supposed to adapt to the feedback we get on the monthly meetings, and it's supposed to be scalable. So in 5 minutes, that's what I can tell you. There's a bunch of slides that cover what Bill did talk about, and I have a diagram and a tree to deal with communication and all the rest of it if the questions come up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moss, and I'm going to jump in first. I don't usually do that when we have delegations, but I want to state something for the record very clearly, and it's my generation that's seen it arise. There was a time in this country when we did not have this kind of private security patrolling stores or shops or streets anywhere. It just didn't exist. And over time, it's become quite acceptable, and I understand fully and support those businesses that feel compelled to undertake that kind of support to protect themselves, their customers, to maintain their businesses. But it's a dreadful comment on society that we're at this stage. And we know, as you pointed out, in the last few years, and certainly in the last 2 or 3 decades, as we have dispersed more and more people from safe, secure places into our streets, that the problem has become overwhelming in many respects, which is why you're here. I want to say thank you to you and everyone with the Old City Quarter who have taken an innovative approach to this. But as I say, it troubles me greatly that I see Superintendent Miller here this afternoon with the RCMP, not getting the support that he probably needs or the money to try and provide the kind of funding. Us as a city being stretched to provide supports to the RCMP to deliver the kind of security services that they were created and intended to deliver, and by and large have delivered across this country for a very long time. We're in a troubled time with some taking the view that the police are in probably far more cases than are realistic have been guilty of misbehavior. This is a very troubling time, and I'm very troubled that you have to be here today. And I very much appreciate this as a pilot project. I must tell you, though, that as much as it has appeal, I'm also concerned that at the end of the day, we won't have advanced very much. Because until we have the kinds of facilities and supports in place in our community to deal with the most troubled and most vulnerable, honestly, in our community. I must tell you, I participated in an incident this morning behind City Hall. Person clearly high with a vehicle, refused to stop. The private security of City Hall tried to detain him, and some other city staffers who've been acting as ambassadors for the payment of taxes. And I don't raise that to indicate that I think things are worse today than they were yesterday. I simply raise it that this kind of incident is occurring all the time. And I'm going to issue the same plea as I've been issuing for a very long time. It's the province, the federal government need to step up to the plate in an even greater way than they have done. And I'm very appreciative as mayor of the number of units that are being constructed in town and the work that's being done. But when the Old City Quarter sends you down to City Hall to ask for this, it tells me, and as I think it tells everyone in the city, that it's not enough. And we need to do better. So I'm going to happily open it up for questions now from the rest of council. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. I have 3 questions to Mr. Moss. One of them is Part A and Part B. First one is you sort of touched on the safety officer issue and being adaptable and having maybe a little bit of skill sets just beyond the average security officer. Are you able to highlight what those might be and how those skill sets will be developed? And the second question I have is what performance indicators will be tracked over the pilot to help determine if the measures and the efforts are successful, and will you provide a report on those indicators to council at the end of the pilot?
Through the mayor, Councillor Brown. So the safety officer, in my mind, has the ability to resolve situations without sort of getting into force, and has the ability to help people that aren't a security concern. And so the way we're addressing that is the pilot project would work with a smaller safety firm who is security is their main business, but they've expressed a strong willingness to work and tailor their approach to suit what we're finding and what's working. And that's part of the adapting in the monthly meetings with Bylaw and RCMP. We've set those up so that we can touch base, adjust, and find what kind of training needs to be added. And the security firm we're working with has expressed a strong willingness to do that. To the second part, the call center that we're talking to is a Canadian-based call center that supports municipalities back east. They do quite a bit of work with the different municipalities. And they have the ability to create incident logs, report those incident logs out to the organization that they assign the case to. And then they have the ability to accept that information back as a closeout and then close the loop with the owners that the callers that requested a callback follow-up. So that's all tracked with their systems, and they can report out daily, weekly, monthly, at whatever frequency you want. And there's actually a piece to that we haven't talked about is because we're talking about an area that has a geographic boundary, as much as I would love for it to be the entire downtown, We had to start with what we had in place and the tools we had in place with the BIAs. Every call is asked to give a geographic reference point, and it's plotted on a custom Google Map layer so that we have a location for every response as well. And so all that information is tracked with a third-party contractor and can report out at any frequency we want. So we need to learn, we need to adapt, and without that data, we just can't do it. So we're happy to, yep, and any frequency you guys want.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. So have you been tracking the calls pre-COVID? Because is business down pre-COVID would be one of my questions.
Is business down?
Yeah, like pre-COVID, before COVID hit, obviously COVID is really going to have a huge impact on everything, but pre-COVID, was there a huge impact?
On businesses in downtown, there was.
I'm talking the Old City Quarter.
Well, the Old City Quarter, definitely. I mean, like we mentioned, over the last few years, we've seen the safety aspect change to the point where WorkSafe is writing orders to companies saying there's no safe way to operate in that neighborhood. And when you have provincial organizations writing those kind of orders to businesses, their only recourse is to relocate elsewhere. And so when leases come up, people were leaving. So absolutely it was having an impact before that.
So WorkSafe has actually said there's not a proper safety plan then?
Yeah.
I believe that actually. And then, unlike the mayor, I have seen a huge increase from when I first came here in 2010 and used to do the foot patrols. And we used to have, two excellent footprint security that did exactly what you're talking about.
Sabina, yeah, she was amazing.
Yeah, but I think there was and this is where my concern comes in with your safety officers. Would WorkSafe support that? Because I think that's one of the reasons that there was a change in that. And plus, Council of the Day pulled the funding, because I think people forget that prevention costs money. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we're back to where we are today, is that we pulled a lot of the funding to stop that from happening. But my concern would be around that. Like, I know where you're going from, but I think, obviously you've talked to a company, but would WorkSafe actually agree to that? Like, if they have to become physically involved, or do they have the de-escalation tactics that you're looking at?
So we have, as individual property owners, we do have that experience at our individual properties right now. So we've hired different types of security guards at those locations. And so we do get a little bit of experience with that. And to date, I've never had one of my properties have to get in a physical altercation with somebody. It's more about that de-escalation and asking people to move and having that support network. If someone's camped out on your private deck and plugged in their cell phone and living there, so that you can't get out, they want to be able to have the ability to call someone who would show up and help them move them along without them having to open up their home and to that experience.
And just my last one, would there be regular, I know everybody's meetinged out, but regular contact between the police bylaws and the safety officers?
Yeah, in our last discussion with city staff bylaw and RCMP, we agreed that we'd meet monthly to adapt and make sure that we aren't doing things inefficiently. The last thing we want to do is make things less efficient. We want to fill in gaps and probably take 75% of those calls away from the RCMP so they can really react quite quickly to the 25% that are active crimes in progress or something that needs that physical contact.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Moss. And I realize there's no motion on the floor right now. I found this an interesting proposal, but one thing that I did want to ask you about, and Mr. Corson alluded to that, and that was the tweaking of the times of these safety officers. And I was a little bit surprised, frankly, that the patrols would be during the night, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., as opposed to during the daytime when there's more tourist traffic and residents on the streets that would maybe feel safer if they saw some evidence of foot patrols or safety officers or whatever. And I know my wife, before she retired, worked for a business in the Old City Quarter, and she would get to work at 6:30 in the morning, and it wasn't uncommon to find somebody sleeping in the doorway and have to ask them to move on. And customers occasionally were leery of coming to the business during the day. So this doesn't seem to address the daytime aspect of the problem, and I know we can't solve it all at once. But could you just comment on that, the hours of the operation?
Absolutely, through Your Worship. In an ideal world, you'd probably be able to do both. Through our experience of properties, it's the trying to stop the problem before it becomes a problem. The activity that happens at about 10 p.m., 11 p.m., downtown. I don't know if anybody's had the chance to be downtown when that happens. It's shocking. The transition from people pushing buggies around and interacting, sleeping on doorsteps, it's more like it comes alive, and the city does a bit of a transformation, and it's very intimidating. If you were to drive down Wesley Street during the nighttime hours at about 12 p.m., I would suggest most of us wouldn't drive down the street. It's a very intimidating environment. And so what we're finding through our residences and our tenants is that's the time to get ahead of the problem. And if you're closing your services down sort of right as the morning crews and people are coming downtown and they aren't encountering quite as much of that, that's a more impactful change because it actually feels safe when you get there. The flexibility is key though, because of course, this is a pilot program and we want to be able to adjust based on the communications we're having with our RCMP and be most effective. So we've allowed for three full-time safety patrols during that time frame. Whether those adjust to suit the peaks and valleys and stretch out a little bit more, I think that's the goal, is to be able to do that so they're most effective. The other piece of that is it's really quite important to understand that we aren't doing this just with no experience. In our private businesses, I'm going to say this is my personal experience at Cardia. About 3 months ago when COVID hit, we had all of our ground floor suites rented with people who had been there since September and were quite comfortable moving downtown, knowing they're moving into a downtown environment that came with some challenges. About 2 months into COVID, we had 3 or 4 of them reach out and say, if you don't get us an inside unit in the next month, we're gone. Full stop, we've tried, we're done, we can't do it anymore, which is fair, totally fair. We then put full-time security on the building from 10 to 6. Within a week, all 4 were comfortable again. So I hear what you're saying about the ideal part, but when the city transitions at night, it becomes a far more intimidating aspect to deal with one-on-one. When you come into work in the morning, you ask someone to move. It's kind of a normal interaction downtown, but during those nighttime hours, it's quite different. And the RCMP are the only ones that are taking it on right now. And a lot of it is just asking people to politely move along and keeping on top of it. But it doesn't happen because of capacity, and we're just trying to help reinforce that.
No, thank you. So from your experience and the experience of businesses, that's when the need is greatest and the effect would be best. So I appreciate that information. Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. This is a really well-developed program, I think. I thank the Old City Quarters and the time that's gone into this. I note that you've actually answered the question of why only the Old City Quarter and not all of downtown. I think this is where the public needs to hear. The Old City Quarter is currently the only BIA that has the ability to collect a special levy from the property owners to participate in the cost of this type of program. The other thing is that the Old City Quarter actually has skin in the game with providing a good portion of this funding that would be required in order to have this. The other thing with the monthly meetings and tracking and hopefully data collection, with this small little piece could actually work into helping with a homeless strategy across our city, right? So I think that it does actually have a broader impact. I think that we can't wait on federal or provincial governments. We have to do what little we can do, and we cannot do very much in our city, but what little we can do, we should be helping our citizens and our business. So on that note, I would actually like to move option number 1.
Do you wish to speak to it?
I just spoke to it.
Thanks for that. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I have some questions, so I'd like to get those off the point first. I'm not sure if we should be debating a motion with Mr. Moss here. So, Ms. Moss, can you give me a better understanding of in terms of the work that you're going to be doing with the John Howard Society in terms of cleanup? Because I hear from the city staff that they're only doing public lands, and we're also looking at adding private lands. I'm just not sure what that looks like, because if I walk downtown, I see a sidewalk and then private land starts, where would these cleanups take place, if you could?
I believe Mr. Backhouse has something to assist.
Just to offer from my own experience that the John Howard really gets at your point, what happens during the day. They are out there during the day. I think whatever the current arrangement is, they are picking up. Like they come into our courtyard at Wesley Square, and so the difference between public and private is invisible to most people outside of this room, and so they are working on public and private land at the same time, even today.
So would the extra money be to do more of that?
Exactly, to expand that program.
Okay, thank you.
The other piece is for the call center to function, we need to be able to respond. And so allocating specific staff to respond first thing every day, 7 days a week, was important for that feedback piece. So if somebody reaches out and says, I have this challenge that's beyond my capability to deal with, if they show up and they get it done the next morning, that's a very responsive feedback loop. And that's what we're trying to get with the allocation of funding, to get that first of day every day.
Okay.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. A few questions. There's a number of service providers in the Old City Quarter area that are, I would suggest, draws for this population. Have you done any outreach with them or involved them in the development of this program?
Through your worship. Honestly, this has come together in about 4 weeks, and we've tried to sample sort of the people who would be most likely to have to cover the cost of this to start with, and try to get some consensus with the the Health and Safety Commission. So we haven't reached out to all members of the BIA as part of this. And to your point, I think if I'm hearing you right, there's ways to tailor that a little bit that might help and enhance the success of the program if you were in partnership with them. And I think that makes a lot of sense to do.
Yeah, and one other question, if I may, and it's kind of cheeky, but so a business owner on Commercial Street that is experiencing the exact same issues that you're experiencing, what would you have me tell them if I vote in favor of this?
Through you, am I allowed to be cheeky as well?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I would tell myself, because I have properties on the other side of the corridor as well, that we had to start somewhere. The ideal scenario would be that we can expand the program to be a more wholesome scenario. But for a group of private owners to try to run this as volunteers and collect a levy or funding, we couldn't come up with a way to achieve that across the whole downtown. So this was our ability to affect change over a specific area and hopefully put framework in place that could be expanded if it meets a success, and that's the desire of council.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thorpe and Councillor Armstrong.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. So now there is a motion on the floor, and I am going to support this motion. I take your point that we need a longer-term solution to this whole problem, but in the meantime, I feel strongly that we have to do what we can, as Councillor Martman said, to support our local businesses and our general public. And what impressed me is the fact that this business association has taken the initiative, and instead of just coming and complaining about a problem or demanding that we put our city money, tax money toward it, they've developed a strategy, and they're willing to put money in the game to the extent of 30%. And I always feel that the city should be willing to, if we can, help people that are willing to help themselves. So I'm impressed with that, and if other business associations get organized around the city and come with similar proposals, I'd be very interested in hearing those as well. But in the meantime, I think for a 6-month pilot project, this would be money well spent. And again, I applaud the Old City Quarter for sitting down, taking the initiative, putting some thought into this, and being willing to put skin in the game. So I will support it. Thank you.
Before I get on to Councillors Armstrong, Brown and Hemmons in order, have we finished questioning these gentlemen yet?
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Bonner, one more go.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've written it down, but I forgot to ask it. But the skin in the game reminded me. In the hopefully near future, we will be having some recommendations coming out of the Health and Housing Task Force. And Some of those recommendations are going to cost money, and some of that money will be borne by the province, possibly the feds, and possibly us locally here. Since you're willing to put some money in now, this is sort of cheeky, but not quite, would you be also willing to look at options when these recommendations come forward as putting money forward then?
My guess is we both have thoughts on that, so maybe I'll go first and Doug can go second. Okay. I think the reason we put so much effort into this program is that the ability for an individual to affect change is limited, as the mayor has mentioned, and I, for one, would be happy to support with energy however I can to affect good change, but there's a limited capacity to inject cash to support initiatives along this line. As it is, this 30% ask is a big ask of property owners who are going to have to still do their private security until we prove success. So I think it's always open to hear any creative ideas that we can be part of, but the pockets are only so deep right now. So, and I think that the province has to be looking well beyond housing if this is going to be a solution for 50 years. It's going to be education. It's going to be all sorts of pieces that help build resiliency in our kids so this doesn't recur again and again and again. And those are well beyond my ability to participate with, beyond my family. So happy to hear the ideas, though.
Thank you.
Darren's right. Maybe we would answer the question a little bit differently. Councillor Hammonds, you asked earlier, has there been consultation with social groups, et cetera? This is a big part of being a property owner downtown, and I've had conversations with most of you around this table. I've had conversations with senior staff and members of the Health and Housing Task Force on this. We don't know if this proposal is perfect, but to use a term I just heard in the break, we believe it is directionally correct. And if there are adjustments, if there's fine tuning in any way, bring it on. Yes, of course, we're not certain this is the best program. We're only certain that if we don't do something, we're headed in the wrong direction.
Before we, Councillor Gesselbrock, I see you as well. I was going to suggest that Superintendent Miller's here, and it might be helpful for purposes of the debate if we actually gave him an opportunity to comment on the proposal, which I believe he's had a chance to review. Superintendent, much appreciate you coming here today. I know it's a stressful and a tough job you have, and the media is not very kind.
Thank you, Your Worship. Pleased to answer any questions you or your council may have for me on this.
I do. Thank you, Superintendent. What is the RCMP position on this program?
So I've just recently become aware of this program. A couple of things that I do want to bring to your attention, Your Worship. Number one, if there's a call center or someplace where people call in, our call takers and dispatchers are trained to ask a number of questions so when officers go into a situation, they know what they're up against. If a member of the public was to call this call center and relate it to the call center then calls the RCMP, we're dealing with a third-party complaint. We're not sure of what details we're going into, so how do we get this right amount of information so our officers go in best prepared to help the individual and or call the support services we need, such as ambulance, fire, or whatever. So that's sort of one of the things I think of. Another thing that, something Mr. Moss said, that some other people are trained in de-escalation. I can't comment on the training they have. I do know that RCMP officers are trained in de-escalation. A lot of times we go into the role as a mental health officer. We are not healthcare professionals, but we're trained in de-escalations, crisis intervention. And one of the things we have to do is realize a number of the files we take and people we deal with are antisocial mental health addiction problems. And we always appreciate help from society and the community. We implore the community not to get involved in areas where there could be criminal activity because they could be injured. We are trained for this. We have the proper liability and whatnot, so we encourage people to be careful in that sort of stuff. So that's just a couple of things off the top of my head, Your Worship, to Councillor Armstrong. I'm happy to go into more detail, but mindful of your time and Council's time. If there's other questions, or we can circle back to this one if you like, Your Worship.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you, through Your Worship, Just a follow-up on that then, because on the lines of communication, my understanding was if a person called in, they would be directly told to call the RCMP themselves, so it wouldn't be a third party, right? That was one thing. It was either, when the first call comes into the call center, is to determine, is it somebody who's just sleeping on the ground, or is it a criminal? And if it's crime, they're to call, and then they ask if there's personal safety or crime in progress. If it is, again, call 911 directly. If not, then they can have a safety offer. So I don't think it will be a third-party condition, so, thank you.
Anyone else to question Superintendent Miller? Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. Could you outline for me how your force views downtown policing versus other areas of policing, and if you view it differently, how does that manifest in operations? Do we have more foot patrols downtown? Just explain to me how you respond to this.
Your Worship, to Councillor Hemmons. So there's a number of things there. So one of the things in the downtown core, the bike patrol unit focuses on that area alone. And 95% of the bike patrol unit is on the downtown core. They work almost exclusively with our vulnerable and homeless community. And one of the things was mentioned earlier by Mr. Moss is, sometimes they ask people to move out of the porticos that are sleeping there. Where do we get them to go? We can see on Wesley Street every morning there's a number of tents before the clean team comes to clean. And the people that are residing on Wesley Street in a mock shift tent city are saying every morning when my officers ask them to move along, they say, "Where is it you want us to go?" This is a problem. It's not a police problem. This is, be it a provincial problem, municipal problem, federal problem, I'm not sure. But I can tell you this is not a police problem because housing is not a police responsibility. Public safety is. And my officers are determined to make sure that this city stays as safest as possible. With respect to different types of policing in different communities and different areas, absolutely. The response that we have within the city of Nanaimo may be different than the response within the city of Surrey, which may be different than the response in the city of Atlin. Response times are often different too. Not all of our detachments are 24/7. And I can tell you that certain units and specialty sections of the Nanaimo RCMP do not work 24/7, but we have a 24/7, 365 response where we can respond to any call at any time. I myself, along with my staff, closely monitor crime statistics and see where we have upticks and downticks. And if we have upticks in an area, for example, break-ins to cars, break-ins to homes, we will assign officers to that area, be it a street crime project team or whatever, to focus on that area, conduct surveillance, and see if we can target those who are committing the crime, because we often find a select group of people will be committing a large number of crimes. And I do want to say that my officers are continuing to do this despite the current political situation. I came back the other day, late in the day, because I forgot something in the office, and at 7 o'clock, two of my officers who were off shift at 4 were just coming back, having worked at 7 o'clock at night. Despite the hostility they're feeling from the community and from TV, they all have a sworn oath, and they will continue to defend this city. I'll give you an example, Your Worship, of a file that happened last night on Wakasaya. A lady called in to say that her daughter was severely intoxicated and trying to slit her wrists. 2 male officers responded to the house. The lady that was trying to commit suicide by slitting her wrists had gone. They found her in Wakasaya. They approached her and started talking to her. She tried to back into traffic. They arrested her under the Mental Health Act. At that time, there was a number of citizens and communities saying, "Get out of our community. We don't want you here. We want a mental health officer or a doctor to come to this file." Now, on the last one, I'm all for that. If somebody here can figure out how to get VHA to come with us to files, bring it on. Because mental health problems are not police problems. It's the antisocial stuff that the people who have these addiction and mental health problems create that then become criminal issues. Despite this, my officers did the right thing, took the person, got them the care they needed. They'll continue to do this. The toll on my members right now is excruciating. Today and tomorrow, I have a psychologist coming in to put half-day sessions on for my entire detachment on how to cope with stuff like this, because I don't want any of my team to have to take a knee. I'd rather be proactive on this one than reactive. And as a result of this, my officers have thanked me and appreciated what we've done. So going forward, Will we police differently downtown than we will in the north end, than we will in the south end, than we will in the regional district, than we will in Lanцeville, than we will in Cedar? Absolutely. Because policing is dynamic, and at all times we will change, move resources where they need to be to make sure we provide the utmost security and safety to the community, which we are sworn to do and we will continue to do as your policing partner. And if council has changes to their priorities, I am more than welcome and work with them and come up with new priorities and how we can work together to make this the safest community in British Columbia. That is our mission statement. That is my mandate.
Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, thank you for that. We used to have a crisis response team, change names, whatever, that did actually work side by side with the police to the point where they were even invited to the police briefings in the morning, correct? Yeah. And a lot of times, it's the crisis response team or the mental health professionals that are making these calls to the police because they're not equipped to deal with it. Would you say that's accurate?
Can you, I didn't quite hear the last part of the question.
And a lot of times it's mental health professionals that are calling the police to help deal with the issues because they're concerned for their own safety. Like an ambulance won't go into certain residences unless the police are with them. And same thing with some of the crisis response teams based on the history of violence of the individual. Would you say that's accurate?
So, Your Worship, to Councillor Armstrong, so we do find that at times the emergency health services, the ambulance, will not go into a dangerous situation unless police are there as an escort. With respect to other healthcare workers, I don't have statistics on that. I can find that out if you're interested.
And then further questions when Superintendent Miller's finished. I have to speak to the motion.
Okay. And speaking of the motion, as Councillor Thorpe politely reminded me, we don't want to drift away from the motion. Are there questions related to the motion that you wish to ask Superintendent Miller?
Not to
Councillor
the motion.
Armstrong.
No, not to the motion. I just want to speak to the motion.
Councillor Hemmons.
Where there is an uptake, you reallocate resources, that it's dynamic. So we have a group coming forward to say the Old City Quarter is a hotbed. Is that your experience of one of the hotspots in our city? Does this align with that kind of increasing, that uptick that you referenced?
So, Councillor, through Your Worship, so we do know that there is a increasing number of homeless people within our community. That number seems to be growing every day. That is not anecdotal, that is statistical, and we do generally see a spike in homeless people in the summer based on weather and based on other conditions. With the number of homeless people at this current time, with the lack of services due to COVID-19, we're finding many of these people confused, frustrated, and seeking ways to get income for food. Food supply is very scarce right now, as is shelter. And a lot of these people will stop short of nothing to meet their basic needs on the very lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of need, i.e. food and shelter. And we're finding that some of these people are committing crimes, be it crimes of opportunity, and I harp on this every time I come to council, and when I deal with anybody, most of the cars that are broken into are unlocked cars. So these, again, crimes of opportunities. We are seeing crimes of opportunities in certain areas. We are seeing crimes of other types in certain areas. With the number of homeless people we see downtown, some of that is anecdotally going to happen.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the comments. I understand it is a heightened situation for you and your members, and I apologize for that stress because I don't think it helps any of us try to tackle these issues. Just to sort of untangle Councillor Hammond's question there, have you seen an actual uptick in the statistics, or is it too early to tell within the Old City Corridor or the particular area we're talking about?
Yeah. So, Your Worship, Councillor Brown, so I haven't actually run the statistics for Old City Quarter. We're, on the 22nd of June, so I will run those basically on the 30th of June for the second quarter. I haven't checked for those specific items. I do want to comment on something I heard earlier with respect to the B&E statistics for specific parkades where security patrols were working. I don't have those statistics. I can definitely get those pulled for specific address or specific item or area to see if they made difference from certain time to certain time with respect to security or not. I can tell you that my experience is that if you do have security and people patrolling, your opportunity for crimes are less because nobody is going to want to have a witness to where they are. The other thing that's very helpful is CCTVs, closed circuit television systems, because that provides evidence that can help us solve crimes, either of a break-in or other types of crime, which helped us greatly in the past.
Councillor Hammonds.
I think it deserves acknowledgement that there are some really difficult conversations going on in the community and in the world right now, and I recognize your role in that, and just like Councillor Brown, that's probably stressful, and I personally am grateful that you're supporting your members and ensuring that they're able to be participants in that conversation rather than a piece of a conversation. So I just felt that needed to be said.
Any further questions for Superintendent Miller? Superintendent, thank you very much for coming today. Thank you to you and your members for what they do every day. As I reminded people the other day, there were thousands of interactions every year in this community with the police and the public, and they're all above reproach in most cases. And there are some incidents, and as you pointed out today, your members have to go into difficult situations where often no one wants to go and assist the person who's in significant distress because they want the protection of the police themselves. And public safety applies not just to the public in general, it applies to those people we expect to deliver those services around mental health and addictions, and it is tough work. And it's often falls to the hands of the RCMP and other police forces to deal with it. I speak with some bias. I have a niece and her husband who are both members of the VPD in Vancouver, and I have some appreciation of the challenges they face. It's just that I think for many of us, we didn't think we'd be facing it in our community as in the volume we are. Thank you.
Your Worship, your unwavering support and that of Council means a lot to my team. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner and then Councillor Armstrong on the motion.
Thank you, Worship. In just as a minor note, it would, I'm not sure we needed the motion when it came out. With all due respect to Councillor Martman, who's keen on putting motions out. You know, it would be nice to have these conversations without the motion on tape, just the thing. What we're talking about today here, I think, is it's reactive spending. And we're now, if I'm doing a quick tally, getting close to the $300,000 mark in the next 6 to 8 months in spending of what I think is reactive money. And I think it's necessary, right, in terms of where we are, but I don't think in the long term it makes sense. And I would much rather see this money spent on proactive programs that actually deal with the root problem and help move things along in our society. And honestly, with all due respect to the mayor and your comments about spending from the province of feds, I think until such time as the city of Nanaimo and we own this problem, that we won't be able to make the real effort and the real ability to make a difference. I do recognize that the province and all the work that they're doing and the federal government and all the work they're doing are partners that we need to work with steadfastly, but this is our problem. It's happening in our yards and we have to deal with it ourselves. So I think that the work that the House and Housing Task Force is doing is going to be key to that. But I will support the motion. I just want to remind everybody that this is money that we'll be spending that we can't get back, and we will not have any long-term solutions out of it, right? So that was my piece. Thanks very much.
Nicely said. I'm going to go to Councillor Gesselbrock. He's been most patient.
Thank you, Your Worship. A few comments here. I appreciate the proposal that was brought forward. I think we're in a really unfortunate situation where things have unraveled and we have to do mitigation, which is not the best way to be spending money and in a position that I don't want to be permanently in. I think that I'm supportive of the proposal. What I would really like to see is in these monthly meetings where the safety officers and organizers of this program meet with bylaws and the RCMP. I would also like to see the service providers or some representative of the service providers that are in that area at that table as well, so that there's a dialogue. Because what I hate to see is that there's private property owners organizing for security, and then there's a whole other sector of the service providers organizing to provide services to people who are extremely under-resourced. So I think that there'd be a lot of benefit from integration of that perspective at the community level because at the end of the day, our communities do have to take ownership over this program, and the more dialogue that happens and problem solving and solutions is where we're going to make forward movement and collecting of stories, because what we really need to do as a community is get louder and clear on what we need as a community to deal with this problem. The province is investing into into solutions, but we need to be very loud and asking for more, because right now the level of investment is not properly reflected into the level of the problem, which is getting larger each day. We are in a difficult situation in this part of town where we are having to provide like the social service institutions right in our downtown area, which is not set up to be providing homelessness and addiction services. And we have to do everything we can to mitigate it. And maybe this option of having a more neighborhood-based call-in might help take some of the pressure off of the RCMP to provide that responsiveness to calls that may not necessitate a RCMP officer to get to. And I would really like to see that pressure taken off, and potentially, as we see the results of this program, that it is maybe expandable to other parts of the downtown as we tweak it and work it from that. But I definitely don't want to lose focus that this is a reactive method, and we need to be investing everything as possible and really supporting the homelessness and health task force and the very important work that's going on, so that we can be very clear what are the longer term solutions to this issue, because we have no choice but to put all our effort and focus into that. So I want to thank the folks from the OCQ and the businesses bringing this forward, and I'm definitely in support of this innovative approach. Thank you.
The hour, I'm going to ask everyone to be as brief as they possibly can. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Just a couple points I want to make. One that Councillor Hammond said, how do I talk to the commercial street owners? They've been getting free security for 8 years. We provide security and have for 8 years, so that's pretty simple for me. Like, they get it, so why can't other? It's always been, if we're going to do that for one area of town, we should do it for the others. Right now, our malls are providing their own security. And to me, if they came to ask us, I would think because we've set the precedents, we should be doing that for them too, but that's neither here nor there. Secondly, when it comes to policing, downtown is treated differently. They've got 8 dedicated officers. That's all they do is downtown. Nobody else in our community gets that type of police service. So I think for downtown to say they're not getting serviced is totally inaccurate, because they have a group that's totally geared towards downtown, as the superintendent said, nothing else. And again, as to the security, I'm 100% behind this proposal. And to me, when some people say that it's reactive, I also say it's proactive, because we can show the government, the provincial government, we are investing in our businesses. We are looking to try and help our businesses succeed, especially pre-COVID times, or after COVID, pro-COVID, whatever the term is. Yeah, because of COVID. I would also like to see if there are dollars available from a COVID response to put towards this initiative, because it is a way to try and help businesses get back on their feet. And right now, we're not, everybody I talk to won't come downtown because of our homeless issue. So I really think it's a good initiative to start. And like I said, we've been doing this for at least 8 years, and I'm aware of probably 10, paying for security guards for downtown. So if we're going to do it for one area of town, in my opinion, we should be doing it for all. So I'm 100% supportive. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. It's with great reluctance that I will be supporting this initiative. I think we're far beyond conversations of proactive and reactive responses to the issue that is facing us. Undoubtedly, we are in a reactive situation. I think the question is, how do we best spend our resources to try to dig ourselves out of it? I also think this illustrates how hard it is to divorce what is within our jurisdiction and what is not. I think the calculation is far more than 300,000. I think as we talk about drivers to our budget and policing costs and bylaw costs and cleanup costs, we aren't doing so because, for the most part, because we're having more traffic incidences. We're doing it in trying to respond to community voices around the dangers they feel, the perceived dangers they feel, and do what we can to address that. But you know, those costs are well over $1 million in annual budget, and only going up if you look at the annual budget. And by no means do I suggest that the RCMP don't have a difficult job. I think their mandate has gotten far too big, and as folks trying to do service to the community, they're doing their best and they're not adequately provided the full spectrum of support that they need. So I think that's the problem when we try to focus on normative conceptions of what we want our society to be. The reality is it's not, and so it's not going to be anytime soon. We talk about social disorder and the flip side of that is we want to get back to social order. Well, that's so far off when we hold on to something that was. So I think we need to start moving towards a new model. I think the presenters tonight would not, in discussions with them, I don't think they believe this is a perfect solution that's going to bring us there. But I do think what is embedded in here is at least an intention of trying to look at the problem differently, pilot something. If it works, it works. If parts of it work, good enough. Let's build on that. But let's not just keep holding on to something that is not going to go away if we just keep resourcing things as we are.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Martin, did you want to say anything
Very
further?
quickly, just wanting, because there was talk about the collaboration with the social service providers, et cetera. And when I was exploring this and asking more questions before the meeting, and it's there in the communication response, my understanding was there will be pamphlets handed out that try to connect people with services that they might not be aware of or might need to be provided with, et cetera. So anyways, we all know I'm for it, so.
You'll stop gilding the lily. Councillor Turley, please. You need to unmute yourself.
There we go. Have to hit it harder. So a couple of points. Number one, on the positive side, I had to do the filming for this Reimagine Nanaimo this morning downtown at 9:30. And while I was a bit quiet till about 10 o'clock, after that, Jay had to keep saying, no, we're going to stop now because it's too noisy. So there was a lot of foot traffic and vehicle traffic, more than I've seen in the last 3 months downtown this morning. I can't speak to other days, but anyway, that's positive. The other thing I just want to clarify, and I'm probably one of the ones that has met most frequently with business owners downtown. I have not yet heard anybody I've spoken to complaining that there's no security or that the city doesn't support security downtown. The complaint I hear is more to go on the lines of how effective the security is being, and perhaps the timing of it, which is why I support this initiative, because it probably would give us some idea of what times of day or not are going to be the most effective to be applying the security. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm in support, but like Councillor Brown, reluctantly. I don't think security guards and safety teams help deal with homelessness. This isn't a solution, so this is another Band-Aid that we're applying, but if we have open eyes as we're doing that, I'm somewhat comfortable. I want to remind Council of an early decision we made in terms of the different groups that could now, if this passes, we set somewhat of a precedent. Other groups could come to us. That worries me. We made a decision early in our term around a technology investment, and immediately after we had approved that investment, we had 3 other groups come forward and ask for a similar investment. So this is something I'm using to weigh my decision. Also, as a member of the Health and Housing Task Force, I know we have something coming, and every penny we spend right now detracts from those things that I hear around the table of long-term solutions and forward-thinking proactivity, et cetera, et cetera. What I find so compelling are the people who are bringing this forward. I know them as trusted business folks. There's an obvious need, and they've come with a plan. This is something we hear all the time. If you come to us with a plan that is well thought out, it's easier for us to debate, and so I really appreciate that. The fact that it's a pilot and a trial worries me, because in 6 months' time we might be facing this decision all over again. Finally, the most compelling piece is that when I heard Mr. Moss say the efforts of the last 30 years are at risk right now, and I think we have invested a lot in our downtown, and I would hate to see for that investment to slide because we we have the ability to hopefully put a Band-Aid on it and then talk about proactive solutions down the line. So I'm in support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be very quick. I will support this because it's the only game in town we have right now. It's a short-term solution. It's a pilot project. And we have a section of our community that has wisely chosen to organize itself into a business improvement association and is trying to do the best for its members and provide an aspect to our city which is attractive to others who want to visit it, etc. So let's get on with it. But I do second very strongly what Councillor Bonner has said, that, you know, this is reactive and it is a pilot. And I am hopeful that the work of the Health and Housing Task Force, that I know is an horrendous burden that's been placed on the two members of council and all those who participate in it, I'm confident it will produce results and recommendations. Councillor Bonner and I will differ about whether we own it. I suppose the bigger question is who will pay for it. It's not so much who owns the problem. So, all those in favor? Contrary? None. Thank you very much. I appreciate the lengthy debate. I also appreciate that we're getting near 0 hour, and staff still have lots of work to do, unfortunately, as do we. Climate Change Resilience Strategy.
Your Worship,
Yes.
I just wanted council to be aware that, yes, it says 4 on the schedule, but you could go past and
Oh, don't worry. I tend to ask that of council, but thank you. Mr. Lindsay, and the patient, Mr. Lawrence.
Along very quickly to Mr. Lawrence here to introduce and both the project and the consultants who I think are joining us and are going to remotely and be able to walk you through the project. I just wanted to highlight there is a reason when we're putting this agenda package together that we wanted to have this presentation on the same day where you received about the land capacity and demographics, because it, like those reports, also form as a foundational document to the strategic work we're doing, to the OCP work that's coming up in front of you. So we thought it was timely to bring both of those in on the same night, or sorry, in the same afternoon. As mentioned in the report, we're ultimately seeking Council's adoption of this work. And Mr. Lawrence's presentation will hopefully walk you through to a point where Council's comfortable with that. I would note this is, and I want to acknowledge the work that Mr. Lawrence has done here. This is a project that's almost 2 years in the making, and it's involved many stakeholders, both within our organization and outside of our organization, to get this to this point. So thank Rob for his work.
Your words, Mr. Lindsay, are very timely and quite appropriate. I think it's fair to say we're all pretty impressed with the work that's been done, and I'd also want to recognize that we have Lisa Westerhoff, the principal of Integral Group, and Tasman Mills Resilience Consulting. I believe she may be.
I see Ms. Westerhoff on the screen there, and
Yes.
I imagine Tamsin's nearby. I'll be brief just because of the time, and we want to move on to Integral's presentation. But, well, as Mr. Lindsay pointed out, this is the culmination of a 2-year study, and I do want to thank a wide range of city staff and management who participated and been part of this work, as well as many community stakeholders that participated in many of the workshops. The objective really was to identify expected and current climate change impacts in the city and come up with a range of actions that we can take over the short term and the long term, but also recognize the work that we are doing now, as well as potential gaps that we need to fill as we kind of move forward with a counterpart to what we've done up to now for mitigation, which is basically lowering our emissions, but preparing for what's coming, because irregardless of any action that we do in the city dealing with climate greenhouse gas emissions, change will still happen. Weather events are becoming more severe. Sea level rise is a reality, and we need to prepare for that. So this strategy helps, well, it's a foundational document. It starts the conversation. It lays the foundation for actions that the city can take going forward. And I know it was in our amendment, but there's an infographic. It's very brief, but it's attached to your agenda. It basically just identifies some of those vulnerabilities and high-risk impacts that were identified as part of the study, just as a reference as we're going through the next presentation. now I might have to skip a couple of slides. Oh, I guess I do. A brief reminder about mitigation versus adaptation. I think I touched on that already, but clearly we have gone down that road of lowering emissions through our Community Sustainability Action Plan, and we are currently looking at an update through the Reimagine Nanaimo OCP update. So that's being amalgamated as part of that process. But the adaptation piece, this will be the first document that covers that issue. And just as a reminder, our Environment Committee has put together a framework, an environmental framework, to try and best encapsulate all the work, the initiatives, the bylaws, the projects that we've done on a wide range of environmental projects in a way that really encompasses a lot of the good work that's happened, but clearly the climate action piece, the mitigation plan, and the adaptation plan fits quite nicely with all the work that's done on protecting our natural spaces, our zero waste and energy management. Oh, okay. I thought I was being called off stage. Anyway, one more slide. Community health and food security, all building and complementing community resiliency, which is really an important fact to acknowledge, is that irregardless of climate action, there's so many other things we do, whether it's the city itself or the community that collectively contribute to community resiliency, that's important to recognize. So that said, I want to pass this presentation over to Lisa Westerhoff and Tamsin Mills, but also thank the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for all the funding they provided for the study, and all the good work that's gone ahead through Integral and Tamsin Mills Resilience Consulting, Associate Engineering, Diamond Head Forestry, and Pacific Blue Consulting. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Lisa.
Great, thanks, Rob. Hopefully all can hear me. My understanding is that I am sharing my screen. Is that correct?
Sorry?
Yes?
Yep, you look good.
Yeah.
Okay, but am I sharing, thanks, Rob. Am I sharing my presentation or am I using your slide deck? Because if I'm sharing my presentation, I'll need you guys to stop sharing first.
Who's driving the bus?
There we go.
You can flip through the slides, Lisa.
Asking the mayor if you're sharing anything involving technology is a waste of time. We have to rely on staff to answer those questions.
All right, well, I'm happy. I think everyone can see it now, hopefully, so this should go, right?
Good.
Okay, I got some nods. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for that, Rob. I'm Lisa Westerhoff. With me is Tamsin Mills. I'm going to be taking you through the presentation, but she's here to answer some more of the deeper technical questions that you may have, as she is our climate resilience expert. And as Rob mentioned, there are a few other consultants that worked with us on this project, so acknowledging them certainly, and also just working with Rob and his team was a really great experience, so we're very happy to have worked with them on this. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of a whirlwind tour of the resilience strategy. Rob already covered this piece, so I think it's probably safe to say that you're all very clear on what the two different responses to climate change are, and how in this particular report or plan, we're focusing on the adaptation and resilience side of the climate response coin. But obviously trying to speak wherever possible those strategies that actually help you to meet your climate mitigation goals, your emissions reduction goals, as well as help to improve your resilience as a community. You're definitely in good company here. I would say you're on the leading edge, but not the bleeding edge of climate resilience and adaptation response. These are just a couple of the different plans that have emerged in British Columbia and a few other places in Canada that are tackling this issue. Some of them are complete, some of them are underway, some of them look at resilience much more broadly than just climate change resilience, and some, like the ones along the bottom, are actually tackling both at the same time, mitigation and adaptation in a single plan. But all this to say is that, this is a movement and a trend that we're seeing across lots of different municipalities as it's increasing in its importance and awareness. It's also an issue that I'm sure you guys are aware that is being addressed at the provincial scale as well. On the left-hand side, you see the Strategic Climate Risk Assessment for British Columbia. This is a framework that they've pulled together to help identify the climate risks that are facing the province, and they've also established a methodology that we roughly followed in this project. But we actually also used another framework that you may have heard of that was developed by ICLEI. It's the Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities Framework, or BARC. And this follows a 5-milestone process that we very sort of closely mimicked, I would say. And it's one that's been followed by over 50 municipalities in Canada, so it's very well established in that regard. So I will walk you through our process, a few of the steps that we took in developing the resiliency strategy. And in doing so, I obviously can't see you, so if you do have questions as we go along the way, don't hesitate to interrupt me. I won't be able to take the visual cue, or we can do all the questions at the end, of course, it's your prerogative. But I will just sort of take you through these and give you a high-level tour of what we developed in the end following this methodology. So first of all, in terms of our process, we begin by using climate projections. So these are, we're actually very lucky to have the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium down in Victoria, who are climate scientists that are able to take global projections of climate change across the globe and downscale them more regionally, in this case, to the city of Nanaimo. And they look at this using different kinds of scenarios. What we've used in ours is called the business as usual scenario, or the RCP 8.5, if you're into the technical term. But basically what that means is, if we don't do any further action to mitigate our emissions, to reduce our emissions in the atmosphere, this is likely what we're going to end up with. This is the climate that we can expect in the future, starting with our baseline today, moving to 2050, and then 2080. So we looked at these projections and we found that you can see a bit of a trend, sort of from the lighter red to the darker red. We're expecting overall temperatures to increase fairly significantly. We know that extremely hot days are going to get even hotter and greater in number in the summertime. We also know that the growing season length is going to increase overall. So some positive news as well. Slightly less positive news for those of us who enjoy the summer months. We also know that wetter days are going to get wetter, so we can expect more rain, and more rain in sort of more intense durations. So those sort of high intense duration events that can lead to flooding or in sort of significant waterlogging, and then finally, we also know that some extreme events related to climate are also projected to increase. So things like wildfire risk and the associated smoke that come along with those, some high winds, and a few others as well. But we also know that we're going to be receiving sort of lower snowfall or lower annual precipitation rates as snow. So we take all these projections and then we try to explore how these are actually going to impact Nanaimo and its facilities, its buildings, its services, its assets, and everything else that is related to the city of Nanaimo. So we worked with several staff members across the organization to figure out what the likely effect or impact, whether it would be positive or negative, would be on the city of Nanaimo services, assets, et cetera. So thinking about things like, what would an extended growing season mean for Nanaimo? What would an increase in temperature, an increase in extreme temperature events mean, or longer rainfall events? So working together to sort of develop those concise statements that really identify what those impacts might be. Then in a few other workshops, we worked with them as well, with your city staff, but as well as some key stakeholders, folks like BC Ferries or Island Health and others, to start to refine further. So we know, out of the impact statement generation, we had 75 impacts. But now we want to start to try to prioritize them so that we can use our limited budget and resources to focus on the impacts that are most important to Nanaimo. So the way that we do that is first we look at the assets or services, et cetera, that have the greatest vulnerability. So are they the most sensitive to particular climate hazards? And are there already resources in order to help them cope or adapt? So for example, a building, an older building that's up for renewal might be more sensitive to a heat wave because it may not have air conditioning or may not have a good building envelope to keep temperatures inside the building. Is that building targeted for redevelopment? Are there resources available to improve its capacity to adapt to those increasing temperatures? Those are the kinds of questions that we ask when we look at different vulnerabilities. And then we also do a prioritization exercise where we look at highest risk impacts. So those are the ones that are going to have the greatest consequences if we don't deal with them appropriately, and they're also the most likely to occur. So we go through a process, we sort of funnel those impacts down. So at this stage, we had 25 higher risk ranked impacts. And then in our last workshop, we worked with staff again to identify the actions that we could take in order to mitigate those risks, to really try to reduce the risk to those assets, facilities, services, or even communities and locations within the city. So that ended up with 67 actions. About 30 of those are priority actions. So we, again, tried to prioritize within the actions that we came up with. A couple examples of the high-risk impacts, you will have them in your brief there, but here are a few of the ones that floated to the top. This isn't an exhaustive list, but reduced water availability, this is something that has been highlighted provincially as the highest risk impact of climate change for BC communities. So reduced water availability in hotter, drier summers. We know that those higher precipitation rain events are going to lead to flooding and potentially property damage. Changes to tree species range, so trying to protect the urban canopy and what changes in climate will do to your existing and future tree species. More instances of heat-related illness, so physical sort of morbidity and mortality, especially in vulnerable populations such as elderly people and the homeless. Landslides triggered by saturated soils, which can lead to loss of homes and property damage, as well as damage to infrastructure. Increased stress and anxiety from those most impacted, including first responders. And long-term economic and social impacts, including challenges for the tax base. So you can see a really range of impacts from sort of physical to economic to social, mental, et cetera. So of those actions that we developed, we have the 67 actions. We then organized those under key priority theme areas. And in each of those thematic areas, we gave one or more objectives so that we could try to condense this for ease of communication, but also to make sure that all those actions were there to serve a particular purpose that was very clear. So in these first three themes, water supply, flooding and drainage, and environment, parks, and recreation, you can see there are objectives here to prepare for your more limited water supply in the summer months, improve the resilience of the existing water supply infrastructure. With respect to flooding and drainage, we want to minimize any kind of urban and overland flooding that can result from heavy rainfall, but we also want to prepare for the impacts of a rising sea level and the associated erosion and coastal flood risk. With respect to the environment, we have the objectives to quantify or assess and manage your urban forests to prepare for a changing climate, and as well to assess and restore your marine ecosystems to make sure that they are diverse, resilient, and strong as well. Under the next theme here, well-being and preparedness, you can see this is quite an important one, has three separate objectives. Firstly, to work with community partners to minimize health impacts of extreme weather, mostly focusing on extreme heat and poor air quality from wildfire events, again, particularly on those most vulnerable residents, including our elderly, those with pre-existing health conditions, and those who cannot get away, so often those who are underhoused and can't get to a clean air shelter or another indoor area. We want to make sure that we're improving the knowledge, the capacity, and the response plans to deal with increasing risk of landslides and wildfires, and improve the community's capacity and resilience following events by increasing their awareness of climate change, what the impacts are likely to be, and how they can prepare for them. Under land use and buildings, we have some objectives to make sure that we're incorporating resilience into new and existing facilities. So the development of new buildings or facilities, as well as major retrofits, we need to be thinking about future climate when we do those to make sure that we are building buildings and facilities that will last us a long time, as well as for homes in the community as well. We want to make sure that any regulations and guidelines actually support those changes to climate-related natural hazards. And we also want to make sure that we're keeping hazardous areas at the fore when thinking about the property acquisition strategy. And finally, we have our final sixth theme here as corporate governance and mainstreaming. So this is not a particular area per se, it's more an overall lens to how city operations can work. So this is focuses on improving the city's agility to respond and recover from climate-related hazard events, and to work with neighboring jurisdictions and other partners, I would say, to support resilience and limit the transfer of risk across jurisdictional boundaries. So really trying to harness resources and those regional partnerships to make sure that response is integrated and strong. Second last slide here. This one really just to say that we're not coming in here, starting from scratch. There were a lot of existing actions underway that could be termed or kind of thought of as adaptation actions. Lots of existing plans and standards that are already starting to set the bar for what we would consider an adaptation action, including things like your asset management plan, your urban forest management plan, community wildfire protection plan. So we are by no means overwriting these. We're drawing on them where necessary and even suggesting updates to them where we think it's relevant, but acknowledging that there are a lot of things already in place. And then finally, we included into the report a section on monitoring progress. And this is really important because it's a way of tackling implementation. You've probably heard you can't manage what you don't measure. And so we've suggested a number of indicators that we think can be used to help monitor implementation over time. And you can start to use to track to update your actions and your objectives over time as conditions change or as goals are met. So that's the strategy there in a nutshell. I'll thank you there and invite any questions at all for myself or for Tamsin.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. Many thanks for the presentation and for staff for working on this. One thing I'm just curious about is I sort of heard that there is an upcoming update to the IPCC projections, and in there they might be updating their models that that sort of better account for cloud cover and some of the impacts that cloud cover have on the modeling and the forecasting. And I'm just wondering if there is a drastic change in the modeling that sort of trickles down to these numbers. At sort of what point do we update it and then update some of our strategies?
I'll let Tamsin take that one as she's unmuted, I can see.
Yeah, great question. So the IPCC is the body that puts forward those different emission scenarios. And then, as you alluded to, then that trickles down into our climate science projections, which we then look at for impacts. So all climate resilience plans do need to be reviewed, and we do recommend in lockstep with the IPCC projection. So IPCC projects in their next AR6, and then the local climate scientists, it will take a while for them to start downscaling. So it's probably a few years from now before the climate science for the area has changed. And then you'd want to review what's being done in terms of any really drastic changes in those science projections. I don't anticipate any drastic changes. Most of these actions in the plan would be positive. They have lots of co-benefits and are positive for many reasons. But definitely when it comes to sea level rise and to some of the extremes, it would be good to review with an eye to new science.
Well, we're either all exhausted or there's unanimity on this. Councillor Bonner, don't let me down. Thank you.
Oh, wouldn't think of it, Your Honor. When I was reading through the report, and I want to thank all the people who participated in this. I kind of saw the report as dealing with climate change because there's no way we're going to be stopping it. While there are some recommendations in there about what we could do to help mitigate things, I didn't see a lot in there. There are some recommendations about going forward, building new buildings, step code, we're already working on that. But it didn't actually address all the thousands of buildings that already exist that are basically putting carbon dioxide and heat into the air constantly because of the way they were built 30, 40 years ago. And there's also the question of storm drainage, and I didn't see anything in there about recommendations of adopting for houses that are connected to the sewers, getting not sewers, but connecting to the storm sewers, getting disconnected from them, so that the storm sewers last longer, and mitigating and getting water back into the groundwater, rainwater back into the groundwater. So are we looking at those as well?
Yeah, a lot of these actions were really triggers, and some of them, while they may be very straightforward, some of these recommendations, others are going to need follow-up studies to kind of come down to more detailed actions that are going to come out of that, and that's illustrated in the report. But I know I&I is a concern, an ongoing concern, and I know a number of our engineering team was involved with the process, and my understanding is actions like that will be followed up on at some point. So this provides the trigger for that as well, by having it identified in the strategy, even in a broad sense, because it allows staff to kind of explore the issue more further and identify specifics, whether that's I&I or other issues, and then go from there, come back to council with more details and a costing and an opportunity, if there is, for external funding, and recognize that as part of the implementation of this going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. So when we do our climate strategy, are we also looking at the impact some of these strategies will have on the environment?
The impacts that the strategies will have on the environment?
Yeah,
well, I guess in a way, this is the strategy dealing with what the environment is going to be doing, irregardless of what we can do right now to lower our emissions and be as energy efficient as we can as a city. So irregardless of that, there still will be changes that we can expect to see, and this is a strategy that's trying to address that issue and come up with some direction on what we can do to move forward to minimize that impact through different actions to try and minimize any kind of stress or any kind of result from any kind of severe storm event, say, or what we can do around building and construction around coastal areas that might be threatened in the future.
Yeah, I guess for me, like I'm thinking in terms of some of the electric batteries, which have the cobalt, being mined in the Congo, where I believe it was 2 weeks ago, 65 children died because the conditions are deplorable.
Right.
And I understand we just toured an EV plant on Friday, and they're not using the cobalt was excellent, and it can actually dispose of. I'm thinking of those terms of those, like,
Okay.
where do you dispose of some of these afterwards? Like, we hear the stories, and I don't know how accurate it is, so please correct me if I'm wrong. When the wind turbines die, they have no place to dispose of the big things, and their lifespan's 20 years, or
Right.
solar panels, we hear all those things. So I'm thinking in terms of when we're looking at strategies to combat climate, are we also looking at the impact it will have on the environment?
The impact. Well, I think that's always in the back of many people's minds when they're implementing a lot of these strategies, but you can only know as much as you can at this moment. New science, new information will come in the future where we're going to have to review where we are and what we need to change the direction, but potentially of any actions we have. So, and I think that's why it's important strategies like this do get that review on a regular basis, and this one does. It recognizes that. And then we can look back and see what's working and not and make adjustments as we go.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Gesselbrook.
Okay, we're on. First off, I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this strategy. This is a really critical component of our overall environmental framework and to move forward with. And I guess one of my questions is, how do you foresee sort of the implementation of this strategy, the targets that were suggested? Where would those be integrated in sort of with our planning process and reported back on, and when would the decisions of what targets would be chosen and uptaken?
Well, yeah, we do have some targets. I think if you think of water conservation, for example, there's some kind of goals and targets we work toward now. There's others that some of these actions are new. We don't have any measures yet, but I think as we move through, for example, the Reimagine Nanaimo process with the OCP, we're going to have more kind of an opportunity to explore that more and then identify specific documents like the OCP we can attach these performance measures to going forward.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through you, your chair. When you look at the projected, like the 36.7 I think was a projected temperature or something. Are there any opportunities out of climate change? Like maybe we start growing pineapples?
Lisa might be able to answer that. I think you had mentioned opportunities while doing your presentation.
Yeah, it's true. Thanks for bringing that up. There are definitely opportunities. I mean, this is a bit more of kind of almost like a risk management strategy, so we do try to focus on the bad stuff. But certainly there are opportunities. One of the ones that's sort of frequently cited for British Columbia is that we're actually going to likely save utility costs in the winter because our heating bills will go down. So warmer temperatures overall mean less need to heat your buildings in the winter. That being said, those may be offset by increasing utility bills in the summer when we actually have to start adding air conditioning in some buildings. So there can be an offset. Agriculture is certainly one. Longer growing season means more opportunities for agriculture overall and greater agricultural productivity. A more pleasant, warmer, consistently warm climate in the summer could be good for tourism opportunities. There are certainly some that we've flagged as we go along. I'm sure there are others too that we can think of.
Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. This great report, thank you for your presentation. There's a lot of recommendations in here, and I'd like to get your perspective on how this is going to change your work plan or how you're going to incorporate all of this. How do you choose? Where do you start?
Well, I think that it needs to be underscored, this is a collective effort, so it's not one department or one person that will be implementing this. This is across the organization. All these actions have a lead group that will be responsible for implementing them. And while there's a staff team that helped stick handle the actual report and strategy, it'll be vetted or worked through the senior leadership team to decide when and how the actions will be implemented. But each of these actions does have a lead staff section or department that'll be responsible for it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to suggest then that if there's Councillor Gesselbrock again.
Thank you, Worship. That was just my one question. It says the implementation of the strategy will be coordinated through the Development Services Department and overseen by a continued engagement of the city's project working group. And I just want clarity on the city's project working group.
That was an interdepartmental staff team that basically kind of helped manage the project since the beginning. So it was staff from engineering, emergency management, myself, planning. We were kind of the core group, but we brought in different groups of senior staff or other staff departments in various workshops or community stakeholders, depending on the needs of the process, and working with Tanzan and Lisa as well to come to those solutions.
Great, yeah, just follow up on that. I definitely recognize that a lot of these recommendations are across multiple different departments, and looking at the environmental framework and the growing complexity around what's needed for climate adaptation and work, I think there's just a growing case for some more resources in terms of management, like a sustainability manager to help coordinate these plans. Thank you.
It's always good to advocate, Councillor. Always good to advocate. Councillor Martman. Oh, pardon me, Councillor Brown. He slipped in. Sorry.
I was just going to thank Mr. Lawrence and all the staff for it, and the consultant team. It can be very despairing work at times as well. So thank you. And I think Councillor Martman was going to move it, which I was, but I will let her.
Climate Change Resilience Strategy and direct staff to prioritize actions in this report and begin implementation of the strategy.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor? Everyone's in favor, unanimous. I just want to extend to you, Ms. Westerhoff and Ms. Mills, thank you on behalf of Council and the City. Very impressive work, and thank you also for the compliment to the City, which is really reflective of the good work of staff about how far Nanaimo is down the road in comparison to other places. It's always appreciated, and a little encouragement in dark times is even more appreciated. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
We're now on to reallocation of street spaces. Mr. Sims. I was going to say, if we ask less questions, we'll all get home faster too. We won't have to allocate the street spaces.
Thank you, Your Worship. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I'm just going to introduce the topic and pass it over to two of our staff. One is Ms. Madeline Coe. Ms. Coe is our new confirmed active and sustainable transportation coordinator. So we're delighted to have her over in the engineering group, and this is really exciting. And she'll be talking, sort of introducing the first presentation, really around the intention of this one was kind of a two-stepper. We're sort of bringing this in response to Council's motion of June 8th to just to spark the conversation. So staff have had a number of ideas and put those forward, but it's really about that sort of conversation. Transportation is a very high interest topic that has a lot of public interface as well. And I think we've heard clearly from Council, certainly, and for greater transparency. And I think this is the intent here today, is to try and ramp that up a little bit. I think we have the transportation group, which has been largely constrained by staff, and we're pleased to announce with Ms. Coe and another young man that will be starting in this September, that will be back up to full staff, and that'll help move things along. But the transportation group works on everything from the active transportation plan, the strategic, to the very operational. I'd like a no parking sign in front of my driveway kind of issue. So it's quite a wide range. We want to be responsive. We want to be open and transparent, especially with Council and the public. And that's going to see a sort of a ramping up of reports. We're going to try and rival Mr. Lindsay's department for the number of reports, specifically on transportation issues, but tell me to stop if you like. So in the next little bit, we'll be coming forward with updates on Front Street and Metro Drive, some traffic calming on Departure Bay, which is this afternoon, Bay Street, Lost Lake Road, an update in September on probably on the downtown mobility hub and sort of in the overall picture of that. And I think one thing that we'll be starting is sort of a semi-annual transportation update, just to kind of give Council a picture of what's coming in, what we're hearing, and what we're working on. So again, just without any further ado, I'll pass it over to Ms. Coe, and her focus is on the reallocation of street space, just to give Council that some food for thought. And then following Ms. Coe will be blank. I just blanked. Isn't that hilarious? This will be Barb. We'll be coming forward to speak on the Departure Bay traffic calmings for Council's edification. So,
Down by the bay where the traffic complaints grow. Ms. Coe, please, and congratulations.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Sims. So as Mr. Sims said, staff have prepared an information report in response to the motion from June 8th, which read that Council directs staff to prepare a report with potential options for the reallocation of roadway space for physically distancing and temporarily using streets for pandemic recovery and response. Such items may include pavement to plaza initiatives, slow streets, and pop-up lanes for cycling, rolling, and walking. So this report provides some preliminary ideas for Council's consideration. Council may wish to tweak these a little bit, may take some away or add new ones. But yeah, what we're hoping to get out of this is just a little direction, a little bit more direction on what are the top ideas and what ones should we look into and get some more details on. So after this meeting, staff can carry out a more detailed analysis of the top ideas, the favorite ideas. We can look into options for resourcing these projects and then return to Council with a report that contains recommendations. So the information report has a bit more background in it, but I thought I would just jump right into the ideas that we have included in the report. So the first idea is adding temporary cycling facilities on Departure Bay Road between Montrose Avenue and Hammond Bay Road. So this segment of road has been identified by the community a number of times as a barrier for cyclists who want to access areas of the city south of the Departure Bay area. So again, we'll have to look into these in more detail, but we anticipate that that's something we could likely achieve with using just street line painting. So the second idea, idea number 2, is to implement a slow street on Georgia Avenue. So this one I do have a photo of, and I apologize that this wasn't included in your package for today, but this will be available to the public online after the meeting. So this photo that you can see is one that I took on Friday in Victoria. So they've implemented a slow street on Government Street. And of course, this is a different context than Georgia Avenue. This is, downtown area. Georgia Avenue is a residential area, but I liked it because it shows kind of the full range of elements that can go into a slow street. So you'll see there's seating areas, there's bollards that have narrowed the street, and then there's the key thing being the signage that says yield to pedestrians. So it still does allow vehicles, but they're given a clear message that this is a pedestrian and active transportation priority area.
Sorry, what time of the day was that taken?
That was taken around 4 o'clock on an overcast day.
On Friday? Sorry.
This is where I'm very grateful that we have EDO time. And so this is just another angle where you can see how the bollards have really narrowed the street in this area in Victoria. So another example, so this is in Vancouver. This one is a lot simpler. You'll see all they've done is just put in signage that says local traffic only, yield to active transportation users. And this one is just kind of a couple of cuter examples. So you can see Tucson has actually brought in their own kind of branding for slow streets, and then this other example shows a bit more community putting their own kind of flair onto their streets with a little bit of an art element. But okay, so bringing it back to Georgia Avenue, now that we've seen some examples of what this concept is about. So Georgia was identified as a potential location for a slow street, given that we've recently invested into the Georgia Greenway, and there's an opportunity that we could enhance the active transportation connections between 2 of the major service areas in Harewood. So idea number 3, so this idea is looking at interventions in the neighborhoods near Halliburton Street. So initially this was looked at, we looked at Halliburton Street itself as a potential area that we could do maybe a slow street, maybe some temporary active transportation lanes. But when we started looking into it, we couldn't identify any options that would be desirable as short-term interventions. So I thought I would just kind of explain why, because I know that was something that came up through the community. So first of all, when we considered the potential of a slow street, well, because Halliburton is classified as a type of major road and also a commercial road on part of it, it wouldn't be appropriate to shut it down to only local traffic. And the other thing that we looked at was, adding additional active transportation infrastructure. So Halliburton doesn't have cycling lanes. It does have a pretty good sidewalk system. So there is a complete sidewalk on each side of the street and a boulevard with street trees and grass. So we didn't see the pedestrian facilities as being a priority in this area. And then when we looked at possibly doing cycling lanes, well, really that would require use of the parking spaces along the street, which we know are actually quite well used by members of the community there. So bringing this in on the short term may not be appropriate, because we do anticipate there would probably be some concerns in the community that would require more time to tease out. But with that being said, Halliburton Street is part of a grid system, so it's not the only street or available space in that area where people can kind of travel north to south. So there's likely opportunities for temporary interventions on side streets and lanes within this area. Slow streets could be considered, and then we also thought there may be an opportunity for neighborhood-led initiatives such as pop-up art, signage, plantings, that kind of thing that would emphasize the space as part of the public realm and part of the active transportation network. And that leads me to the 4th idea, which is a neighborhood grant program. And now this one is likely something that we couldn't bring forward in the short term, but as the report notes, these ideas came up because of the pandemic, but they're not only a good idea during the pandemic, they're a good idea at any time. So this is something that we thought could be considered as a way to allow communities to pursue these types of interventions on a longer term basis and an ongoing program. So really what it would be is a way for the city to support neighborhoods to implement small scale community development projects within their neighborhoods on an ongoing basis and with the city's support. So those are the 4 ideas. They all would need some further feasibility analysis and looking at options for resourcing them. And we would also recommend community consultation for these, but with that being said, I'm sure council will have some extra thoughts and maybe some more ideas to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, you have a question?
Thank you. Through you, I have a couple of questions. Out of curiosity for idea number 1, with the, which is really basically a paint line, why do we need a design feasibility? I don't.
So that's the realm that I am just starting to learn about. I might have to lean on some of my other team for that. I think it's because we haven't actually gone out and done measurements on the street yet to determine, is there enough space? Like there may be some constrained areas where we need to consider different, different
just paint a line.
Interventions. Yeah, well, hopefully it's that simple, but I guess we'll need to look into it more.
It's pretty narrow there, Councillor.
I
Travel that road every day.
There's room.
It's just.
Oh, I wasn't going to touch it.
I'm going to wait anyway.
Mr. Sims.
Your Worship, thank you. Essentially, I think you've touched on it. It's that there are constraints, or we may not be aware of all the constraints, and just to make sure that we can accommodate all users of the road, that would be the intent. Do we have to shift the yellow line and so on?
So may I ask, is it staff that does the design feasibility, or do we actually pay for that design feasibility? And if so, what do they usually cost?
It depends on our resources, and that's what Ms. Coe was talking about, is if this is an idea, as an example, that council floats to the top, then we would return very quickly with an idea of what all of the costs may or may not be.
Okay.
So we may, sometimes we can do it in-house, but it depends on the workload that's on our plate at the moment, any given moment.
Okay, and then if I may, I just wanted to ask about number 4. Now, there used to be a time when we had SPAC, we actually had neighborhood grant programs. Do you know if we do still have neighborhood grant programs?
I'm not familiar with it.
Because it used to be part of our grants that you could apply for.
I can probably talk. Yeah, at least, thanks.
Or maybe we can wipe off the one we used to have and revise it.
Don't worry, Councillor Gesselbrock, you're next. I haven't forgotten you.
Thank you. Through your worship, so for sure the city does have, well, the Partners in Parks program would be an example of one that essentially does something very similar. So if we were to look into that, we'd definitely be seeing, hey, how can we make sure that this complements what we're already doing, because there are definitely a lot of great things that the city is already doing in that regard. So it'd be kind of a Made in Nanaimo approach. I know I used Victoria's Migrate Neighborhood Grant program as an example, and that's a very all-encompassing one. It does include more park projects, which we're doing in our own way. So we'd be looking at a kind of Made in Nanaimo approach. But I think that the focus of this type of program, maybe a gap that we have at the city is, do we have a neighborhood grant program that would focus specifically on like roadway space and that element of the public realm?
Perfect. Thank you.
In order, Councillor Gesselbrock, Hemmons, Turley, and Brown.
Thank you, Worship. First off, Ms. Coe, welcome in your new role. Super excited to have that position filled, and the recommendations put forward, great work. This is something that definitely been looking forward to seeing. The Departure Bay Road between Montrose Avenue and Hammond Bay is something that I bike across regularly, and I'm always thinking that it needs something done in that region. And I think being able to identify areas in town where simply maybe some paint would do the trick to begin making it more accessible for bicycles is great, and I look forward to identifying more areas in town where that's really what would be required, would be adding some lines. I think other options in this report are very important to pursue, but I must say I'm the most excited about the implementing a neighborhood grant program. I think that type of investment where we can get community buy-in into their neighborhoods to improve walkability, to improve tactical urbanism initiatives is what we really need to be doing to leverage participation, build pride of place, and make places more livable. So I definitely will be supporting that, and can pass a motion to get further investigation in that grant program. So thank you so much for these suggestions. They're great, and I'm looking forward to seeing them pursued. So thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. First a question, and then I'll share my preference. So for the 4 ideas, how did you arrive at them? Were they a mix of stuff we hear from the public or council conversations? Why these 4?
Through Your Worship. So yes, it was a combination of the Departure Bay example, I think, was one that staff was aware of from hearing from the public, and then the others had come up at the council meeting. And so to prioritize which ideas we were going to bring forward, we were looking for ones that we knew there was already interest in, so that we had at least a bit of a step in the right direction and knew that there was at least a level of support for the options if we're looking at doing them on a short-term basis. And then the other thing that I included in the report was just the principles from the National Association of Transportation Officials. They kind of gave some principles to consider when you're looking at doing these types of temporary interventions. So we were leaning on those as well, and the examples that we had already seemed to fit fairly well. So,
thank you for that. So I am in full support of the neighborhood grants, because I think if we ask residents to help us figure out where the bottlenecks are or where the challenges are, that's always going to yield a better result than if we, in our bird's eye view, try to look at the city in that way. So I'm a fan of number 2, the slow street on George Avenue as well, but I have never had a resident come to me and say, this is a problem. The Georgia Greenway doesn't connect, and Haliburton doesn't actually have complete sidewalks, nor does it have a treed boulevard, but it absolutely does have parallel side streets that are really utilized by pedestrians and cyclists. So I don't see the need around Haliburton, but yeah, the neighborhood grant program I am in full support of. Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Welcome to the team. So I couldn't help but notice that in some of your examples from other cities, as well as number 2 and number 3, the streets that were chosen for calming were calming. That's the next one. Active transportation were streets that currently are not heavy vehicle traffic streets. However, number 1 being Departure Bay Road is fairly heavily used, along with some form of public transit using that street as well, for portions of it. And so I was wondering if any thought had been given to, for example, going up Elk Street and up through Lindburn and up that way, where the grades in individual locations aren't as steep as they are on Departure Bay, and certainly you don't have the traffic volume of vehicles in those as well. Government Street in Victoria, portions of that had already been blocked off for quite a number of years, and most people use Douglas Street. So thank goodness they didn't decide to make that one combination of all types. Although there is some cyclist blocks, I think about 4 blocks of Douglas have a cycle lane as well. But anyway, that's my only concern, is trying to train vehicle drivers and trying to fit a street into where there isn't necessarily enough room to combine all forms of transit when there are other options in parallel streets. Thank you.
Apologies, I don't know if I got the question out of that. I was having a little bit of a difficult time hearing as well, but
So it's just considering the alternate routes, was that considered as part of the departure bay?
sure, that would be great. So I may just defer to Mr. Rose for this one. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Councillor Thorpe after this.
Sorry, through your worship. I think if I understood the correct question correctly, when we were looking at Departure Bay Road, would we or could we consider utilizing some of the neighborhood network in the area of Departure Bay Road? And the short answer is absolutely, we definitely can. The Departure Bay corridor is just intuitive in that it's a more direct route. And there is some other topographical challenges going through the neighborhood, but that's definitely an alternate or a bypass that we could explore through this next sort of level of review.
Councillor Thorpe.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Through you, first of all, my apologies. This meeting was scheduled till 4, and I have another commitment I need to get to. But before I go, I do have a question. I just want to understand that any of these or possibly other projects would come back to us with more details and feasibility information, and we would make decisions on them at that point.
Through your worship, yes, that's the idea, that today we'll get a sense of what council's top ideas are, and then we can do a more detailed feasibility analysis of each of them, and look at funding sources as well, and come back with some actual recommendations for you.
Thank you, and welcome, by the way. But I have to add that, as council will recall, my enthusiasm for this overall was less than stellar, so I'll be interested in more details on any of the individual projects. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe.
Your Worship.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. With respect to number 4, I think we've talked about it at the neighborhood association meeting, and I think there's sort of general support of the idea there. I think it's worth exploring on the longer term. And I think number 2 on Georgia is a good idea in terms of implementing what is within the neighborhood plan in some fashion and a quicker term. I think number 3 is a great idea, but it sort of pairs to me with number 4. And I think number 1, to me, it's sort of a non-starter that we're still considering painted cycle lanes as an appropriate measure for active transportation infrastructure. I think we need to get away from that idea that it's good enough. And overall, I would sort of say I was looking for a little more from this report, to be honest. When I look around, I see a lot of municipalities that were able to act quickly and act with ideas being brought forward, and this is, to me, a regurgitation of a lot of things that have been discussed, and a process that is just sort of analysis paralysis and continued length to some, I wish I never had to bring forward this motion, but I did, and so I'm looking for a little more get up and go in some of this stuff and being a little more creative, and I might be alone in that, but yeah, so I would support a couple ideas here, but in general, I really was looking for a little more in this report. I don't feel as a councillor should constantly be having to push for ideas on some of this stuff. Thank you.
I'll get to you, Councillor Gesselbach, don't worry. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Unlike Councillor Brown, I think I kind of agree with your point that the bike lanes should be separated. We just are in a position where we necessarily can't always do that. In the time that I'm riding around the city on the bikes, I do recognize that the painted bike lanes are respected by cars. They recognize those. They don't always recognize the green area when we're coming through, but that's another point. So I would like to see the cycle lane on Departure Bay done. I would also like to see, as part of that, that you take away the parking on the side of the street that the bike lane is on, because people tend to use that as an opportunity to park, and they will park right in the bike lane because there is no curb to stop them from doing that. which can then be put back in the event that we have bathtub days and stuff like that. You can just put a bag over the lines. So we'd like to see that. I'm quite in favor of the community grants, neighborhood grant idea. I would like to see that as well. And I noticed that we didn't talk about Werners in this presentation, which I think are a neat way of taking a block and slowing it down. And I think if I could encourage staff, right, the need to slow streets down should be topmost all the time. Find a street, hey, we can slow this thing down and just get on with it. That's what I would like to see, as opposed to maybe council having to come forward, okay, I'm going to pick this street, right? I would like to see those ideas coming to us, right? And our ability to slow streets down, we can do that, and I think we should. And pick a street and find a way to slow it down. Werners, I think, are a great idea for neighborhoods where they want to have a street that's, say, between two main streets, and they just want to put trees on it and have people play on it and stuff like that, and limit through traffic through them, sort of thing. So I'd like to see more of those done as well. In terms of funding, I know that if we slow our streets down and we have less traffic on them, we won't need to repave them as often, and we can take the money out of the repaving budget, if anybody's looking forward to that. And finally, if you're looking for suggestions, the place that I tend to bike on a lot when I'm heading downtown is Boxwood. Right now, it's a very wide street. Has no sidewalks at all, and will never have sidewalks because all of the industry has been built up there. We're right now in the position of starting to build sidewalks that start nowhere and go nowhere, which I think is a waste of money. But the thing with that street is a lot of people are using that street now. It's between Northfield and East Wellington. And so there is a bike lane at the bottom end of it, but there isn't a bike lane at the top. Most of the parking that's on that street is during the day, and it's basically employees of industry that have a parking lot. So they don't use their parking lot, they actually park on the street, and maybe they're saving it for customers, which aren't there right now. I think they can either park in the parking lots that belong to the companies there, or the employees can park on side streets, which would then free up a huge amount of space on both sides of the street, because there are a lot of people that are now using that for walking, and they literally have to walk in between parked cars and on the landscaped areas and dodging trees and that sort of thing. So that's a street I think could definitely be looked at in terms of putting 2 bike lanes down there. There's plenty of room to actually curb it as well, make them definitely separated, and just take out the parking. Right, so those are my ideas.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Just curious a bit on 2 things. Process in terms of council support for each of these. Are we asking for each one to be followed up, or just on hearsay, or should we be passing motions?
I don't think staff are looking for motion. I'm not going to recommend motion. There are financial implications here. I think staff is looking for guidance and response to suggestions, and that's all for the time being.
Because I think there's been sort of varying responses, and there's been a couple where there's been conflicting response. And I'd speak to the Departure Bay painted line. I put 5,000 kilometers on my bike in this last year, and I can tell you that painted lines on roads with a bike lane are very respected, and they make a huge relief for a cyclist. And any opportunity that we can on road with enough space to put a painted line for a bicycle, even though it may not be the gold standard, we should be investing time and energy in getting that done, because it sends a message to the community that bikes are on the road, that they need space, and then we can slowly fill them up with more elaborate lines. So I think that that's strongly one that we do need to pursue that type of thinking. So I really appreciate that one being brought forward. Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Real quickly, yeah, just to reconfirm, my top 2 choices would be the Departure Bay and the neighborhoods. What is the timing on this? Because I was hoping to get things moving sooner than later, right? When can we actually see a slow street in our city?
Through your worship, so what we were hoping is that we could turn around the report with recommendations before you take your recess in August. So
may I ask, I need to ask. So we have other cities like Victoria and Vancouver and that are able to just put a couple signs up and get going on it. Why can't Nanaimo do that?
Well, I'm going to jump in before Mr.
Okay,
Sims
you can
does,
jump in.
because for starters, they have a far more concentrated population in a much smaller geographic area. That's the basic right off the start. Victoria's 100,000 people, so do we. The city of Victoria is a much smaller place. The city of Vancouver
Okay.
has 675,000. Anything they do there has a wonderful and immediate impact, and that it's more problematic here. Before we go any further, I just want to pay compliments to Ms. Coe for putting together, and the staff for putting together these ideas as quickly as they have with the time they've had since the motion was passed. You know,
Okay.
these things don't occur overnight. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. And in speaking with Mr. Rosen last week, I think part 2, the next piece is planned for July the 13th.
Okay.
And just to get further clarification on what Councillor Gesselbrock was speaking to about a motion, I think maybe Mr. Sims should speak to what kind of direction they're actually looking for from you all, just so they can move forward with that clear direction and come back to you for the 13th.
We're just trotting out the pony. We're not going to ride it or buy it just yet. Mr. Sims.
Just need to clean the
Thank you, Ms.
podium.
Coe.
Thank you, Worship. And as I think as both you and Councillor Gesselbrock have said, I think we just want a sense from council what ideas twigged, or if there was other ideas that were floating out there that were of interest. But I think we've heard the consensus that fairly quickly, and I'll put this to council to make sure I'm not misinterpreting, fairly quickly we'll turn around on what would be required for the Departure Bay cycle lanes, and then maybe in the longer term we can frame the tactical urbanism, the grant funding. If that's, we'll try and bring it in the same report. We may not be able to implement it right away. That is more of a longer term and public communication piece. So I just ask for a general nod, I think, unless I'm off base with that one.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
I think the Departure Bay and the grants program definitely. I definitely would be adding my vote for the Georgia Avenue candidate as a slow street as well. I know was mentioned by a couple other councillors, so that's something, I don't know if we're only allowed 2 out of the 4 or 5, but I think that there's some great ideas here. So I'd say 3 out of 5 at the very least.
Your Worship, it's a fairly tight timeline in consideration of all of the other work that's going on, and that's what we've been struggling with even now. One option, we'll be able to turn it around. 2 options, okay, yeah, we can, but if you want details on all of them, it might be a struggle to make it in time for the 13th. We'd love to give you all of that information, but I think agreed the Georgia Greenway is something that needs further follow-up. It may not be that sort of immediate as far as this quick response kind of approach, if that's okay.
Thank Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. First, I have to apologize. I need to leave. Secondly, I know as far as the neighborhood grants go, there was earlier conversation about supporting neighborhood associations, and I don't know if this, it seems like the timing, if there's a July turnover, that there's not going to be time for that, but just to acknowledge amongst the group, there are other conversations happening around neighborhoods, and if we're going to bolster how neighborhoods see themselves and engage with the city, et cetera, that I don't want it to be necessarily specific about tactical urbanism, as amazing as that is. I want the neighborhoods to choose. So I'm just sharing that. This isn't the only thing we want neighborhood consultation on.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. I hope this has been helpful. Ms. Coe, much appreciated. We have one more item to go, Departure Bay Road Summer Traffic Calming Update.
And I'll turn the mic over immediately to Ms. Thomas to speak to this one. As council's aware, it's been quite intensely topical.
Ms. Thomas, welcome.
Nothing quite like being last on a late agenda. Thank you, Your Worship and Council. So last summer, we did a 40 kmh zone on Departure Bay Road, and we didn't see a great response by the traveling public to the change in speed limit. So we got direction from you in the fall to come back for this summer with a seasonal traffic calming plan for Departure Bay Road. I apologize, the graphic was late to your package. What we're proposing is traffic calming curbs at the 3 existing crosswalks. The traffic calming curb is 3 meters long, which is about 9 feet, by about 1 meter wide. It's made out of concrete, and it would be pinned to the asphalt so that if it was bumped by a vehicle, it would stay in place. I had an email from a resident this morning asking for some clarification around the delineation, and I would imagine we will put high visibility cones or delineators on the traffic calming curbs so that they're visible in the 3-dimensional plane so that drivers can see them clearly. And after our conversation today, the plan will be to take this to the neighborhood association and the public for comments from them, and then implementation. And so I don't know that I need to share anything else around that. Is there any questions or comments that you'd like to share with me?
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question, I think. Seasonal, how long will they be implemented for? And will sort of a staff report be back on how effective it was?
So through your worship, the plan is to leave it in place until October, and we would evaluate the before and after to see how effective it is, plus we'll gather comments from the public. And I would imagine if it's highly successful, I can see us, if council chooses, making it permanent. So that option could be there if that was your desire, and we will bring a follow-up study to you, a report to you in the fall.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, if I may. I'm curious about the why we would take them down in October. I think about a week ago, we were in a conversation about commercial in Bastion, and the idea of changing stop signs and then changing them again didn't make a lot of sense. And we already know what the speed limits are now. In the event that we put these down and the speed limits go down, why wouldn't we just bolt them to the ground and leave them there?
Through your worship, I think that's a fair question. And October is when our traffic volumes and pedestrian volumes start to decline. We are here to take your direction. If you want to see that changed or extended, I'm open to the idea.
So in theory, we could just say at the end of summer when we said, okay, the traffic did slow down, things are a little bit safer there, we could then just make them permanent, I'm guessing. We would probably put in permanent curbs, not necessarily those, but yeah, okay.
Through your worship, perhaps then we bring the report back before the end of October so that we can transition to something permanent without too much ado with the public. I'm kind of making it on the spot here, so.
We do.
Councillor Turley.
Bishop, through you to Ms. Thomas. The concern I would have of leaving them there year-round is I know we don't get a lot of snow days, but snow removal, how are they going to impair the ability to plow Departure Bay Road in that area if they remain there?
I do apologize, Your Worship. I didn't exactly hear Councillor Turley's question.
I believe Councillor Turley was asking about snow plowing in the winter.
Yes.
Is that correct, Councillor Turley?
Yes, that's correct. And if they remain there, how that's going to impact the snow removal.
Well, through your worship, that is an issue for sure. We did do some referrals within the city, so we know that emergency services is all right with this plan. That's part of why we're using lateral friction versus vertical speed tables. So yes, putting delineation on the traffic calming curbs does help with snow plowing. It tells the snow plow truck driver where the obstruction is. So yes, for sure that's an issue.
I have a question, and if you can answer it, that would be wonderful. What did the RCMP have to say about this stretch of road in terms of accidents, injuries?
I apologize, Your Worship. I don't know that from historical knowledge. Perhaps Mr. Rosen or Mr. Sims can help.
Any comments? The reason I'm asking is, and look, I well appreciate the concern of the neighborhood association about this stretch of road. I travel this road at least twice a day, 5 days a week, and more often. It is the route I take all the time. My general observation is, and I'm not diminishing their concerns, but my general observation is, in the summertime when it's busy, this happens to be one of the slowest sections of road in the community. People are turning left to head up the streets on the left. They're slowing down, you're stopped, there's pedestrians going back and forth across the two crosswalks. You're always on the lookout for kids and people. It's a natural slowing down. Busy streets, in my respectful opinion, are slow streets. Where people speed is where they see no pedestrians, where they see no traffic. So that's the reason I ask about the accidents. I understand the desire to prevent accidents and injury and death, but I'm curious to know, and if staff can get an answer at some point, I'd be happy to hear it, as to what's the actual experience on this stretch of road in comparison to other roads in the community. Is this up there? Is this a stretch that the police and ICBC and everybody get together and discuss? In other words, I'm happy to implement slowing solutions because it's nice to slow down when you're headed home, or even when you're headed to work in the morning, puts you in a better frame of mind perhaps. But I want to know that we're not being a solution in search of a problem when there are other streets in this community that might merit, in fact, genuine slowing down because of the accident rate or the injury rate or the death rate. I leave it with you. This is a report only. This is going to be discussed with the neighborhood association, and hopefully it'll meet with their approval, and we'll see what the results are come October, and whether or not in fact it's been successful, and how we're going to measure that success.
Thank you.
No further questions? We have no bylaws, no notices of motion, no other business. Agenda planning, Ms. Gurry. Thank you, Ms. Thomas, much appreciated.
Thank you, Worship. So basically today you have your regular agenda planning document that's attached to your normal Governance and Priorities Committee meeting, as well as this last page that is a summary page, not unlike the slide I brought you at the last special council meeting, and it's just confirming with you all so you all have a better idea of what the schedule in July looks like. So this covers the July 13th council meeting, and the first item is a carry forward from our last Governance and Priorities Committee special council meeting, and it is governance, and so Councillor Thorpe wanted to discuss question period. There was some other discussion council wanted to have around correspondence and proclamations and anything else that comes up, so it'll be a general governance discussion. As well that day is the council resolution update. So council may recall last year I brought you about a year's worth of, maybe even a little bit more, of resolutions passed by council and the status of where they're at. So every council meeting you pass motions. They are assigned to staff to follow up on those motions. Staff track those on a list that we get every Thursday afternoon, and they are tracked whether they're complete, in progress, not started, canceled, and updated once one of those steps has been achieved. So that will be brought forward to you so you can see what's outstanding and what we've accomplished of your asks. And I think going forward, we'll bring those a little more frequently because they're quite a bundle to go through when you do it annually. And this was going to come to you pre-COVID, but then COVID happened. So we're going to get that to you, as well as the reopening strategy plan. So this won't just be for facilities, but it'll also be for some of those service deliveries that we've been doing virtually or in other ways, but going back to a more face-to-face or public interaction model or added to. So how those phases and steps we are progressing, as well as council meetings. So given the new order that came out last week, so there's site plans and procedures and protocols and governance matters that need to happen around council meetings. So we'll be going over all of that on the 13th. And part two like I just mentioned, Mr. Rosen said, and Mr. Sims, that on these walkable streets item that you just went over on the agenda. Then July 27th is scheduled for social procurement. And capital projects part 2, you had a top 5 discussion about a month ago now on capital projects, so that'll be coming back before you. And some sports venues that Mr. Harding would like to talk to you about, and the tie-in and some opportunities and things going around sports and recreation facilities. I won't say anything more because I'll be wrong, and Mr. Harding will have to get up and say something. So I just wanted to confirm the July schedule.
I'm
If
not
council
seeing
has
any
any questions,
objections, Ms. Gurry. No objections. By our silence, it is approval, so thank you. Motion for adjournment, Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to staff for putting in a longer day than usual, which unfortunately